will coordinate with Anita ma'am. So let's
Sure.
start.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. I welcome you all today this morning on behalf of Zone 4 Solution. I am Tanushri Verma, working with Zone 4 Solution. And today we are here to discuss on women leadership and disaster risk reduction issues and challenges. It's an international webinar, and Zone 4 Solution has been organizing this kind of webinar since last 3 months. This is third webinar in a row, an international webinar where we see participation from around the globe. And today also we can see that people from various countries has joined us. I think around 51 countries has registered with our platform, and the participation is increasing. And we'll see like how many join and how far we can reach to communicate our thought in view of women empowerment and DRR. As we all know that women empowerment is a process of personal and social change through which they gain power, meaningful choices, and control over their lives. Studies have shown that disaster fatality rates are much higher for women than for men. This is largely because of their gender asymmetry in vulnerability to disaster risk, which is rooted primarily in geographic, economic, and social, educational, informational, and political power imbalances in our society. And we can see the current crisis also, those kind of issues and challenges for women are arising, women or especially the girl child. When we see disaster management as a framework, there are three phases we largely talk about: pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster. But for women, the scenario is completely different. The pre-disaster vulnerability among women play a major role to determine the impact of disaster in post-scenario. There is special need, in fact, especially those of pregnant women, lactating women, adolescent girls with a special need of hygiene are ignored. Thereafter, post-disaster, women are held back from faster rate of recovery and from regaining their confidence because of lack of that kind of capacity building, skill development, orientation, and participation in decision-making process in pre-disaster scenario. Due to the social setup, women are considered more as a prime giver for children. As a result of this, there is a differential impact of disaster on women, which translate into higher vulnerability for children also in future. In reality, while women vulnerable to disaster are often highlighted, their actual potential role in disaster risk reduction has often been overlooked or ignored. Thus, today we are here to discuss not only upon the, how we can consider women as a person who can participate in disaster risk reduction process as a decision maker, as an equal partner, not only as a victim or a beneficiary of any disaster post-disaster scenario. Thus, we need to enhance women and children's skill in view of DRR so that they can better respond during disaster. And it is very rightly said that if we educate a woman, we educate a family. And if we educate a girl child, this quotation I just saw, if we educate a girl child, we educate a whole future. So today we will also take a pledge here that we will work on this quotation in future also. And we have got very good panelists from around the globe, including very good women leaders from India and various countries who are working for the cause of women for a long time. So it will be very good to listen to them. And I will request everyone to mute yourself during the discussion, and we will open the platform in the end. And for all the panelists, I will kindly request that there is a dedicated time slot, and kindly stick to that time slot. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Nakul Kumar Tarun, who is director with Zone 4 Solution, to give the welcome address for this program. Mr. Tarun was deputy director earlier with NDRF, and he has a vast experience of working with international national organization on disaster risk reduction and response processes. He was also associated with the South Asian Associate for Regional Cooperation Disaster Management Center in India for a long time. He worked with MHA, NDRF, Ministry of Home Affairs in India. So he has very good experience and has been working in disaster risk reduction for last 20 years. So now I hand over to Mr. Nakul Kumar Tarun for give his welcome address. Mr. Tarun.
Thank you, Tanushree, to starting the program. And first of all, I welcome you all, those who already joined. Though I was looking for my all speakers, so I would like to name few names. Uh, am I audible to you?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yes, sir, please proceed.
Very good, very good, very good. So, first of all, I want to welcome Dr. Anita Bhatnagar Jain, ma'am. Uh, she has a very big experience, and she has worked with NDMA, and right now she is the member of UP Public Service Tribunal. I think someone is murmuring, so better switch. Better mute his mic. I also would like to welcome Muhammad Qasim Haideri. The situation of Afghanistan is not permitting him to come live, but as a the program, as when this was decided, he confirmed. I welcome to Rekha Yadav Madam, IRPS. She Joint Secretary Ministry of Panchayati Raj Government of India. She is a guest of honor of today program. Uh, uh, we will love to hear her from her the state of women in Panchayati Raj. I also welcome another speaker from Netherlands, Sandra Margen Santos. She's a basically researcher, and she has vast experience of women index. So she will speak on the subject. I also welcome Sri Ashish Panda. Ashish Panda ji has more than 10 years of experience with the government of India, NIDM, MHA. He's a Central Secretariat Service employee. I I would like to welcome MS Surekha Pereira from Sri Lanka. She's the program quality and design analyst for UNDP at Sri Lanka country. I will, also would like to invite Sri Sunil Sharma, Vice President Zone 4 Solution, and Sri Abdhesh Kumar, Assistant Professor, Invertis University, and of course, the first voice you heard on this platform, MS Tanu Sri Verma, Head of Research and Training. So I think Anita Bhatnagar Jain ma'am has joined. Yes, Anita Bhatnagar ma'am has joined. So Ranveer Singh ji, please give her presentation right. Ma'am, namaskar. Tanushree ma'am, from my side, welcome speech is over. Context is we feel that we
Shall
feel
I
that
drop in? Yeah. Yes.
yeah, we feel that women participation in disaster management leadership is low, and that's why policy is skewed towards men side. So and whatever happening around the world, so that's why this international webinar has been organized to discuss the issue and future ahead. So Tanushree ma'am, please take over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nakulji. As we all know that disaster risk reduction and women issues are cross-cutting issues, and it's an important part of socioeconomic development sector also. Making disaster risk reduction a gender sensitive is essential for achieving our sustainable development goal, which has been set by global world. It has been observed that gender equality and women empowerment are key to success of all post-2015 multilateral agenda in field of DRR, including 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework of disaster risk reduction, which target for 2030. And all our future action are reducing climate change and disaster risk does talk about women leadership, women participation in DRR. And one of the important priority area of Sendai framework is also understanding disaster risk. So today we need to understand disaster risk in perspective of women, their issues and their challenges they face aftermath of disaster, during disaster. So now I once again want to welcome the chief guest of our program, Dr. Anita Bhatnagar Jain, ma'am. And I also got an opportunity to work with Madam at National Disaster Management Authority. Dr. Bhatnagar is a retired 1985 batch IAS officer for Government of India. She has vast experience of working in the field of disaster risk reduction and also served as a Joint Secretary for National Disaster Management Authority. She is working for environment for 2 decades and formed Bal Paryavaran Vahini of 100,000 children and made a film on Hamari Prithvi Hamara Ghar, screened by UNESCO. Dr. Bhatnagar is currently working as a member administration UP Public Services Tribunal and will be discussing more upon the women leadership in disaster risk reduction, global and regional framework. I welcome you, ma'am. Kindly unmute yourself and go ahead with your presentation, ma'am. Thank you.
A very, very good morning to everybody. Namaskar. At the outset, I would really like to thank Zone 4 Solutions, and especially Nakulji, for really pestering me to somehow join this. And I'm very thankful for his persistence, because of which I believe that today I would be able to learn a lot from the esteemed speakers from all around, and especially not only from the country, but also from various other countries too. So, having said that, I would like to make a small presentation, which I'm going to try and share because I had some technical glitches in the morning, so I was not able to join. So I would just like to share that content and also speak with you side by side of what my thoughts are, having worked luckily in this sector of disaster management, which is becoming extremely critical for the world economy, as we see from day to day, not only from the economic point of view, but also from the point of view of the quality of life of all human beings on this earth.
I will request everyone to kindly mute yourself. Very important presentation is going to be done by Madam Anita. So we'll all listen to her and then we will open the session in the end for question and answers.
So, as we know the topic, women, leadership in disaster risk reduction. This picture really tugged at my heart. We see how, in consequence of an earthquake, the houses are in shambles, but who do we see carrying the load in more sense than one are women, whether it's children or whether they are the remains of the house which have to be carried. So even though we have experts from all around, I thought we will just re-jog our memory that what is a disaster in the simplest terms? A sudden accident or a natural catastrophe which seriously disrupts the functioning of the community or society and causes human, material, economic, or environmental losses. And what is most important is that exceed the community or society's ability to cope using its own resources. And disaster has become a very, very complex term, various kinds, and disaster has manifold impacts. So disasters lead to displacement, loss, death, disruption. That is physical infrastructure, moving of people from one place to another, but also disruption of persons, places, relationships. And most important of all, an aspect which I feel which needs to be covered in a more focused manner is, which is not covered, imbalance of psychological well-being and the disturbance in the nurturing environment. Well, the figures are mind-boggling, and we see that the disasters and their impact, they are increasing year by year. And the scale of progression is not a general one. In fact, the gradient is becoming extremely steep. So we see that globally in 2009, 396 natural disasters, about 12,000 deaths, 95 million people affected, And generally, we tend to forget whenever we talk of mitigation, because the most common way when we talk of disaster, most people assume that it is just response and rehabilitation. In fact, the mitigation part is very important. So if you see 103 billion US dollars in economic losses. Now, when we go to the sector of disaster planning, so obviously where we are having the most disasters. So Asia has 40% of disaster events, 45% of deaths, and 74% of total effect. And we in India, we unfortunately account for 20% of the total deaths and 24.5% of the total number of people affected. Now, if we see the type of disasters, this is just by this diagram, we can just broadly make out that from 1998 to 2017, in a span of around 19 years, how the climate-related disasters have increased. And what is the share of the geophysical disasters? Because every planning, obviously, when we go down to the grassroots level to plan, we obviously need to account that which area suffers the most disasters and which kind of disasters. So the types of disasters, as we can see, that the most disasters are floods, then storms, earthquakes, then extreme temperatures. We never thought that extreme temperatures would become such a huge phenomenon, such a huge disaster that countries will have to formulate policies to account for them. And now those countries which never had heat waves are also facing them, as we have seen in California, US this year, also in Europe this year. Then droughts, wildfire, volcanic activity, and mass movement, which is becoming a major disaster. The mass movement, not only because of natural disasters, but also because of other human causes, has become a very important area in which we need to focus. And our national disaster management plans, we earlier had 17 disasters, but as with time to time and with the change in the climatic conditions, with the change in social conditions, the number of disasters have now been increased. And as we can see in 2016, we updated and we added thunderstorm, lightning, dust, squall, hailstorm, glacial lake outburst, heat wave risk reduction, biological and public health, forest fire. And another important feature about these disasters that the time frames, the planning, are they recurring? Are they regular every year? The short-term planning, the medium-term planning, and the long-term planning. Now, when we talk of disasters, before I go to the topic, or rather focus on the role of women leadership in disasters, I feel that we need to ponder and think over that what are the impacts of disasters. The most important impacts are psychosocial disasters impacts. I'm not going to go through this whole huge list. This is just to show that these disasters are of various kinds. The physical disasters, the psychological, the impact, and the social activity, which is influenced, and the environmental activity. Various kinds of emotions. When we plan basically for the physical rescue, the physical rehabilitation. But what about the guilt of surviving oneself and the others being left behind? The fear, the grief, the numbness, the despair. There are various emotions which people have to tackle for years and years and decades, and maybe they are not able to get rid of them also. The social issues, the displacement of individual, as I spoke earlier, the tracing of relatives, searching the anguish that whether the person is alive or not, and the closure. And that is especially very important in case of women. In fact, I did two studies. One studies I did on the National Disaster Response Forces, who had done duty in the cloud outburst in Kedarnath a few years back about post-traumatic stress disorder. And I also did another study in a village called Devi, which is near Kedarnath, and that is now unfortunately known as the village of the widows. 52 women there lost their husbands. Some of them were related, so the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, they had both lost their husbands. And the very important factor was that they had never seen the dead bodies of the dead. So the closure was very, very important, which never happened with them. So refusal to accept the loss or the injury that those people are never going to come back because we have never seen the dead body. The confusion about the nature of the treatment and the hopelessness of how to cope with, how to sort of rebuild and restart the life in actual terms. So leadership is defined in various ways, and there are various kinds of leaders, obviously depending on the context in which we are speaking. So I, researched about it and I thought a very simple definition of leadership. So leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others, the team which we are leading or the team which we are guiding towards the achievement of a goal. So when we talk of women leadership in DRR, so we are seeking for leaders. And by leaders, I just do not mean the leader at the helm of the whatever operation is being executed. We need small leaders in the villages, in the cities, in the slums, whosoever is affected. But this leader has a huge impact. But that impact can be limited only to be a small community, even only at a small family. We need leaders in every family too. Now the question, why women leaders? I'm very happy to see that in this webinar, there are a number of males. Somehow in society, we associate that when we talk of women, only women are supposed to sort of tackle the women and look after their needs. How are we going to change things if men, whose percentage is much more than women, also do not have a pro-women and a sensitive attitude towards women? So I'm extremely thankful, Nakul, to see you and the other male members in this. Because unfortunately, as I said, even in IAS, in our service, there are certain departments, even earlier it used to happen, certain districts which were earmarked only for women, that women can handle this, or that this aspect relates only to women, so only they can look after. So ultimately, we can progress only when we have a combination of both. But yes, for certain situations, we definitely need women leaders. So you have the statistics before you. So we form half the world, more or less the same statistics, half of South Asia and half of India. But when we speak of disasters, women are the main victims of such hazards as wars, natural disasters, fatal diseases, epidemics. Since all of you are related with this sector, but still at the cost of repetition, I would like to point out that in general, women and children die 14 times more. That is a shocking and a ghastly figure according to. Yes, in 1991 during cyclones, maybe our preparedness was not that good at that time. And every country has tried to develop their disaster management. But still, out of 140,000 people, if 90% of the people who died were women, then it is really something extremely, extremely alarming. In 2004, in the tsunami in Indonesia, the 75% of victims were women. So when we speak of natural hazards, they are gender neutral. Yes, when an earthquake happens, it is obviously going to affect everybody who is in that area. A flood is going to affect everybody in the area. But the critical part we realize is, whatever studies and surveys have been done, that the impacts are unfortunately not gender neutral. Men and women are affected differently, even in the same household. And the issue of women in disaster risk reduction is not a very, very simple one. In fact, it is a very complex one, as we all know. Because we just can't have a silo that this is DRR. No. DRR is only a part of the whole huge society, wherever the disasters occur. In fact, when we speak of it, not only in a country, even within a country, even within different states, let us take India, in different states, not only how the disasters, which disasters impact, but in different states, there are different ways. The literacy is different. The way women are treated is different. So, well, I'll come to that in a later slide, but still. So, men and women are affected differently, even in the same household. Disaster impacts reflect, reinforce gender inequality. Because there is one thing that we are tackling something and we are providing a solution and improving the situation. But no, the disaster is in fact reiterating that. Because in whatever society we are talking of, the gender dynamics influence that how preparedness is done, how response is done, rescue, and then ultimately how rehabilitation is done. So unfortunately, this gender differentiated impacts exacerbate gender inequality, worsening resilience for future. So it is not a matter of, a few years. The matter is that it is for a few decades. So now in this pictorial one, we see how disaster impacts the orange one. And in the maroon portion, the shaded one between the two circles, we see that the impacts depend on our exposure to the disaster, the vulnerability, the preparedness, and the coping capacity. But when we speak of gender inequality and when we speak of vulnerability, the preparedness, and the coping capacity, in most societies, women tend to suffer on this front too. Sorry, I think I skipped a slide and So disaster mortality in relation to development status. So we all know that the rich and the affluent countries, their preparedness is better. So there the impacts are less. Even in many more developed countries, the literacy levels and the equality of women, even if we see the gender index, the global gender index, which are the countries which are at the top in the latest year, as in all the years, they are the Scandinavian countries. But when we think of other countries in Southeast Asia, even in our country, so the lesser developed countries, the impacts are much more. And obviously, the people who are vulnerable are the poorer lot, and those who are the poorer lot, the most vulnerable are the women in that sector. So as I said earlier, that the factors affecting the role of women in society in totality will determine how we speak and how we tackle DRR. The societal mindsets. Interestingly, I would just like to share from my experience in administration. We have lots of crime, generally everywhere we have a number of crimes which are committed against women. But wherever we work, just by being in a service or by being in a position, we do not naturally imbibe the objective mindset to tackle it. Now, let us say if there is a case in which is being examined by a person who has an extremely patriarchal mindset, and that person commits sort of thinks and is conditioned to think that this is normal in society, this happens to women. So we cannot expect a quick and a very fair solution from the same person or an inquiry from the same person. So the societal mindsets, we carry them wherever we are. Racism, we all know uneven access to education, lack of employment equality, job segregation. Certain jobs are only for women. Yes, certain jobs are for women, but unfortunately, many other jobs in which women can go, their percentages are very, very less. In very important sectors where we speak or leadership in, even in corporate sectors and others, the percentage of women is generally very low. We have not exceeded 22% in general in this. The legal protections, we may have the best laws, but by the best laws, if we are not, the society is not able to provide actual legal protection to the girl or the woman. It's a question mark. Bodily autonomy. Do we have a right over our body? And do I have the power to make a decision about that body, about how my body would be used? Then the access to medical care and the political representation. Ultimately, that also matters because that's the highest kind of leadership because you're formulating policies. But well, in case of our country, after the 74th Amendment, it is so good to see the women pradhans and the women block level, heads and at the Jilla Panchayat level, district level, because this change is going to take decades and decades. But the trickle down effect you can see when you see that these women are now in place. So, well, since we've been talking of gender, so gender reflects the social, behavioral, and cultural attributes, expectation, and norms associated with being male or female. Gender inequality, I feel, is very important when we talk of leadership, because how do we tackle this gender inequality? How these factors determine the way in which men and women relate to each other, whether it's a family or a society. And the most critical word I've thought is the resulting differences in power. So power is a very critical word wherever we speak. So how is the power equation? And power obviously here means the capacity to make decisions about one's life and act on them to achieve a desired outcome without fear of violence, retribution, or fear. And gender-based violence, we know, because, even in case of disasters, post-disasters, we see an increase in gender-based violence. Physical, mental, sexual harm or suffering. So women in particular face barriers to access information and resources needed to adequately prepare and to cope for a disaster. Because when we are going to make a society aware, we have to think how complex is the society and all those who make it up. So the awareness cannot be limited only that we hold a meeting and whosoever comes in it. We have to single out. Like I presented a paper at Sendai, and in disability disaster risk reduction, the various kinds of disabilities which we have to formulate a plan for each kind of disability. If we are announcing in a village and somebody who cannot hear will obviously not come to know. If a person cannot see, then that person will obviously not know where to go. So we need to plan for these very, very small details. So in the same way, if women are not important in a society, they might not have access to information and resources. So including access to early warning and safe shelter. The critical part, access to bank accounts and to protect their savings from disasters and stable income. Now, when we plan for women, they are not just women. They include a very, very highly diverse groups, the adolescents, the pregnant, the lactating, the aged. And then we have to keep into account that they are a very vulnerable group. But when I speak of planning for women, I do not merely mean that we plan only for women in the awareness phase. So, well, I would also like to share with this youth that the latest COVID-19 impact has reconfirmed and reiterated that women are disproportionately affected as far as social and economic impact is concerned. Now, what has happened? COVID-19 has revealed what we already knew, but it has also again told us that women are overrepresented in certain kind of occupations. Now, these are the hardest hits. So many of these women, even post-COVID and in the phases which we get in between waves, they have been unable to get employment. So the burden of increased childcare has come on them, and the domestic responsibilities have also often fallen among women. The implications of female labor participation and financial autonomy. Now, like the news which we read about Afghanistan, an honorable minister is going to join shortly, as Nakul told us. The news which we read about Afghanistan was that in certain areas which were captured recently, the women who were working in banks, so they were told to go back to their homes. They cannot work in the bank, and send some male member instead of them. So there goes the dreams, the aspects, the whole lives that way. It is not just a button that the woman can just be pushed out, and maybe there is nobody else who can come and replace the job from her family. So economically also they would be affected. So surge in gender-based violence during quarantine, and then access to supportive services obviously was not available. One couldn't even go to neighbors or to family. So now the disaster management cycle, which we all know. So pre-disaster preparation. According to me, this is the most important phase in disaster management. And as I said, that in general, everybody presumes, most people presume disaster is rescue and relief, that we see those photographs that people are being rescued. So if our preparation is good, obviously we all know that the impacts would be less. So in preparation, we include women not only taking into account how they would be affected, but also to include women while planning. So they need to play a major part. And how will they play a major part? Until and unless we recognize, the society recognizes that women are important and almost half of the population, and they need to share their burden to or share the responsibilities to. And since they are sensitive to certain things, which because of being a woman, we have certain requirements which need to be taken care of. So like I said in DRR, in the Sendai workshop, I was amazed and I was so happy and I was so inspired. You know why? Generally, one assumes that if somebody is challenged, so then that person, we just have to look after that person. But do we think that that person is equally powerful as us? So there was this one lady speaker. She was dressed very smartly at Sendai. Everybody was dressed smartly. So I think I noticed her more. She was dressed very smartly in a skirt and a coat, wearing high heels. And she had a hand on the person who was accompanying us. And she walked so fast and she went and climbed on the stage. And when she started speaking to, she could not see. Wow, the confidence of the lady. Even, narrating to you right now, I'm getting goosebumps. I was so impressed by her. And the way she spoke, and she changed the concept of everybody in that hall, that anybody with any disability does not mean we have to look after them. They are equal partners while planning. So the same thing I want to reiterate for women, that women need to be partners in this. The rescue and relief. What surveys tell us that when rescue and relief happens, generally the boys or the men are rescued first. So in that also we need a sensitization. And when we speak of relief, where women are sheltered, they have certain needs. Those needs have to be taken care of in certain societies. I mean, I read about a disaster incident in a society where women were bathing somewhere and water flooded in. And since they did not have clothes on, so most of them died because they were hesitant to go out rather than save their life. Only few of them survived. So when we talk of relief and the relief shelters, specifically how we house women, women have certain needs periodically every month. So for that particular period, for periods and for menstruation, you have to account for that. Women cannot bathe in an open area. So all these things have to be taken into account, but also many other people view those women in those sheltered areas. So women feel unsafe. Psychologically, as it is, they are going through a trauma of maybe losing loved ones, so somebody has died, and total uncertainty of how life is going to be after that. Now, rehabilitation. So I will again go back to Daily Gram, and where I was speaking of those widows. The women are exploited when we speak of rehabilitation. So what happened in that only economic aid was given, or there were a number of societies and NGOs rushing in and they were just being photographed. So the women were in tears. I did not take a single photograph from them, and they were very happy because of that. But by merely providing economic aid, we are not rehabilitating women. So especially we need to account for how they are going to use that money, how for next 20 years they are going to be looked after, especially the psychological aspect. So I've already gone through this: disaster, lifestyle changes, family violence, and wife battering. So it's a complex convergence. So many departments and a number of departments are going to speak in this, but in all these aspects, these departments, we have to speak of women. Now, this is my last slide. So then gender is not just about women, it is about relations between males and females. And when I saw this slide and I saw these women in Orissa going for rescue work, they reflect that they are agents of change. So we have to make sure that we do not disadvantage women and girls. And we need women in every sector in disaster risk reduction. I'm very sorry. I think I have exceeded a little because I tend to get very passionate and emotional, and I stopped looking at the clock. So the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Seek to learn.
Thank you, ma'am. It was indeed a very knowledgeable, detailed presentation about women, the condition of women, and how we can mainstream women in DRR. You not only talked about disaster in a very simple way as per the Disaster Management Act 2005, you also emphasize upon the various issues and challenges women face during disaster. And you rightly said, ma'am, access to information, access to knowledge, and political participation at grassroots level, at various levels, certainly enhance women capacity to cope up with disaster. We have seen that from the Odisha super cyclone, we have come a long way, ma'am, with very effective disaster management act, with the support of various state disaster management authority. We could also see, ma'am, with all these processes, that now we can see women menstrual kit and all the relief material which are get impaneled by government of India. I have personally seen during the Kerala flood. So it's a change, and we are doing this. Social change does take time, and we are in the process, and with the support and guidance of people and leader like you, we will certainly reach to that level, ma'am. You have rightly said that if we want to mainstream women, we have to consider them as a change agent. And it's not, gender is not only about women. It's a very cordial relationship between men and women. And we can certainly see that if we can ensure participation of men to discuss about women issues, we will certainly able to mainstream women in DRR. Very thank you, ma'am, for this insightful presentation. And with this, I think our next presenter was Mr. Gasim Haideri, Deputy Minister for Disaster Management and Humanitarian Affairs, Afghanistan. He is a next focal point for SFDRR, but he is not able to join us because of certain unavoidable situation. And he was about to discuss about impact of extremist behavior on women and girl child based on current humanitarian crisis. But he did send his message in the morning and requesting us to pray for Afghanistan people, especially women and children in Afghanistan. We express our solidarity with people affected in Afghanistan. And through this platform, I feel that we should continue to work for humanitarian crisis globally and regionally, or at local level, for improving status of women and especially girl child whose right to survival, protection, participation and development are getting hampered through this humanitarian issues and through this humanitarian crisis. It's not, as you rightly said, Madam Anita, that disaster are not gender specific. It's our human this thing intervention which make it specific to certain gender. And certainly with continuous process of rigorous process of working together, we will able to come out this scenario. Connecting to the our previous session where Ma'am Anita talked about women participation in Panchayati Raj system and urban local body through 73rd, 74th Amendment, we have our next speaker, Ms. Rekha Yadav ma'am, who is Joint Secretary with Ministry of Panchayati Raj. She is 1995 batch Indian Railway Personal Services Officer, and she will be discussing about Panchayati Raj institution as a window for mainstreaming women in governance and DRR. As we know that to achieve sustainable development and disaster resilience, we may need to build both men and women. Women equity recognize that different approaches may be required to foster a just society for all human beings based on individual aptitude, ability, and interest, regardless of gender. One of the priority of SFDRR also talk about strengthening governance in DRR and managing disaster risk reduction. And it is pertinent to mention here that 73rd, 74th constitutional amendment in Indian India provided Panchayati Raj institution and urban local body like municipality and institution of self-governance. They were put in place to decentralize and develop functionaries and fund. So the decentralization process reached up to the Gram Sabha level in villages and ward level in the urban area. It opened a new vista of women's journey towards empowerment, and it paved the way for women participation in grassroots governance and decision making, which is an important opportunity to mainstreaming women in all our government efforts and schemes and programs through which they can further sensitize society at large. So I welcome you, ma'am, Rekha ma'am, and I will request you to kindly unmute yourself and go ahead with your talk, ma'am. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I would at the very outset like to thank Nakulji for having organized this webinar today. It's a very pertinent topic. Tanushriji, I would like to thank you and all others present here. As I said, it's a very pertinent problem as of now, a issue which touches everyone. And as Anita ma'am before me has pointed it out very succinctly, that how the disasters and disproportionate factorization of women impact of the disasters, gender-related adverse impact, and how they can be mainstreamed has been very beautifully put up. Thank you, ma'am. So, as has already been discussed, as we are aware, that the countries around the world have been becoming more susceptible to frequent disasters. These have incurred both losses of human lives, assets, and human lives, not in terms of just lives, but livelihoods, general quality, and others. Now, these disasters are not just natural ones like the earthquakes or the floods, the climate-related droughts, cyclones, fires, but also man-made. We have breakouts of wars, war-like situations, epidemics, and sometimes inadequate response to disaster itself becomes a man-made disaster. Now, what is common in both these categories of disasters is the vulnerability of women, children, and the aged. There has been a disproportionate impact, especially on women. Now, this increased vulnerability of women, though primarily is due to biological reasons, it is also associated with factors which are socially and culturally so deep-rooted in the community. They are expected to go with it. They are the, in terms of vulnerable section, are the most vulnerable, because not only do they have to, rise up to the challenges as in the PowerPoint Anita madam had shown, which spoke, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we could see those women carrying their household belongings and their kids in front of their broken houses. Now, women are the ones who have to face the different situations at various stages of a disaster. That is their role in ensuring household food security, which normally is also the case, but is accentuated especially during this period. Their dependence on natural resources to do this. It reinforces the impact of disasters. For example, in the droughts or slow flooding, in search of the supplemental incomes, the women are left to fend for themselves. And it assumes even greater responsibility for caring for their family during this period. In post-disaster situations, again, women are more vulnerable than men. Their caregiving roles, they expand dramatically after a disaster, because not only are they supposed to fend for the household chores, food, first aid, caring for the infirm, and all of it while putting themselves at the back burner. After the immediate post-disaster period, when adequate relief does not pour in, Sometimes they have been bartered for food. Young girls have been, kind of married off at such young ages. They are wedded to older people who may perhaps buy them in guise of marrying them. And this has been catalogued and recorded in cases of the post-cyclone, post-disaster cases in India and abroad. So why, when we say that they are vulnerable, are we saying that they are always the victims, or they have to be the beneficiaries? No. I think they have a huge role. Their role is important in disaster risk reduction and risk management. Their very vulnerability is a factor which needs to be, kind of, which in fact makes them the prime candidate for a role in disaster risk reduction. Resources are limited, and, like cliched as it may sound, but, women are multitaskers, managing in very limited resources. They have that skill inborn. These are the soft skills which are, ingrained into women folk by birth. I mean, this is not to say that men are not better managers or good managers, but this is something which you have been by virtue of the cultural mores has been ingrained into women. Then they also have critical information about community resources by the very fact that they are going foraging. They are looking at collection of, I'm talking about the rural areas here. They're looking after firewood collection or others. So they do have critical information about community resources in terms of physical resources as well interaction with other women folks. They also know they have their own kind of groups who can tide them over these problems. They are adept at managing resources, and most importantly, they are resilient. And this has been, observed in the case, for example, the remarkable work done by certain NGOs. There was this Swayam Shikshan Prayog. I think this was an NGO which has more than 15 years of experience for working for women and poor communities in rural India. In fact, I would love for their work to be catalogued at some point in time, because they have proved that the capability of women in handling disasters, especially in 1993, the Latur Maharashtra earthquake, they had contributed in repairing and strengthening of damaged houses. In Bhuj, Gujarat again. But the good thing here is that it's the grassroots women's groups from various places who travel to the inflicted areas. They shared their experiences because they were from the rural Maharashtra, and they had already gone through the first initial in the recent memory of the Latur Maharashtra earthquake. They shared experiences, they pledged long-term assistance. But what in fact they have done is they have built the capacity of rural women's group to access and manage the development resources and to participate in the decision-making processes affecting their families and communities. So this is where this is what is the more important thing, that they are partners. They are not victims. They are not being doled out some charity. They are the ones who are deciding. They are the ones who are then acting on these decisions, which are affecting both their families and their communities. Mami Mitsutori had once said that if it's not risk informed, it is not sustainable. And something which is not sustainable has a human cost. So reducing economic losses from disaster itself has the power to transform lives, because not only there'd be life saving, but they would also be mitigating the impact of the disaster. While we are spending, a huge, humongous amount in post-disaster activities, if a similar kind of effort is put in at the stage of pre-planning of the disaster reduction, mitigation, preparedness, then it would go a long way in actually making a saving both in financial terms and also in life terms. Now, the UN Sendai Framework, obviously launched in 2015 and has a mandate till 2030. It covers the issues comprehensively, basically understanding the disaster risk, strengthening the disaster risk governance to manage the risk, and investing in the disaster risk for resilience. enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to build back better in both recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Now, the good thing here is that India is one of the first countries to create the National Plan for Disaster Reduction. And, the 3 Rs becomes very important here. That is the reduction of the risk. You may not avoid the occurrence of the risk, but better preparedness would reduce the mitigation of risk becomes very important. Somehow, it has still not been given the due importance that it should have been to, as I have mentioned earlier, that it would be also cost effective in terms of both life and material costs. Second is the response during the disaster. Now, here again, the community involvement, it becomes very, very important. If there is a plan, you know exactly who's to do what, the involvement of community with their shared resources and the shared duties and responsibilities as to how to, you are not left to fend for yourself and, moving in all directions. You know a clear-cut path. It is the response during the disaster invariably takes up from the first one, that is your reduction of risk and the mitigation of risk or the planning ahead. And the third one is the relief and rehabilitation, which becomes very important. And here again, it becomes important that women play an important role in this as being the fulcrum of the families and the communities. We accept them and acknowledge them as such, but when it comes to giving them the power of decision making is sometimes where we lack. Now, being from the Panchayati Raj ministry, I would like at this point in time to share the work done in this regard, the provisions available, and how it is impacted or how it can impact, the reduction management and response during the natural disasters or the man-made disasters. So, as per the 73rd Amendment, there has been a role envisaged for women in the local governance, and 33% of reservation for women in the Gram Panchayats is mandated. That is 1/3 of the women of all elected representatives ought to be women. Interestingly, more than 20 states have more than 50% reservation for women. And as on date, we have something around 14.5 lakh women elected representatives. That forms around 46% of the total elected representatives. Now, this, why I'm mentioning is that, it is giving us a fair share as almost a 50% or 50% or 1/2 of the population, nearly 1/2 of the population, they are getting a representation nearly 1/2 in the governance. Now, this is the first step. We are not saying that merely being elected is giving you that partnership and decision making. But yes, it is a good step. It is a first step. It's a very good first step, I must say. So now the role of PRIs in governance, and especially women in through the Panchayati Raj Act and through the Panchayati Raj institutions, is that the reservation for women has provided them an opportunity for an initial entry into the decision making or the governance per se. It has also, as we said, we mentioned the cultural part of it. It has given them outdoor mobility. Now, the mobility was, it's not that they have not been mobile, but outdoor mobility outside of their villages, outside of their towns, moving to other places in the position of decision makers, in the position of being elected representatives. Now, one important thing that has been the focus of the Ministry of Panchayati Raj is the capacity building and training. Now, capacity building and training is by no means limited to women, but there has been a special impetus for the women elected representatives. This helps her to meet with other CBOs. They have the various training programs that you attend. You have lots of exposure visits, panchayat meetings. So basically, this enables a woman or woman elected representative to unfold her potential through increased exposure, greater information. You've got greater knowledge and awareness. Now, this is what she can directly use in her work for growth within and without. That is the leadership quality the development of leadership quality, and the capacity building in this regard through the efforts of the various government schemes in the Panchayati Raj Act. Now, during the disaster, in any case, any kind of planning activity, you'll find there is a huge role of the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers, and the self-help groups. Now, these are the women who are play a great role in the community participation, whether it is any kind of drive, maybe a vaccination drive or a mission portion drive, or health related or education related. Whenever these drives are there, they are the major participants, and community involvement per se is ensured by especially these three mainstream groups, and they have performed very well, and they are the ones who would also, in case of any disaster, they are again roped in. So with the Panchayati Raj thing, there is a greater access when you are elected representatives. When I say a Panchayati Raj thing, I'm talking about the 73rd Amendment, where the participation and the representation of women has been mandated. So this experience, leads for you to have an access to the credit finance through self-help groups, through banks, through various programs and schemes of the government and related agencies, which you otherwise might not know of. The Manregas has expanded, the women material base, enabling them to become more socially and economically self-reliant, and creating a resource base for sustainable livelihood for villagers through the expanded network. Now, I would, especially like to, discuss the Gram Panchayat development plans, the planning process at the village level. Many of you who have been in the rural areas would be aware that there is for expanding or spending the 15th Finance Commission grants or the State Finance Commission grants, you're required to go in for planning. This exercise started in 2013-14 somewhere, and it continues till date, where all Gram Panchayats, and we have around 2.69 lakhs of Gram Panchayats and traditional local bodies in the rural areas. And when in 2015 and 16, this planning process started, whereby each Gram Panchayat was required to plan out its activities as to what it would do with whatever resources it has or it gets from various schemes, and to spend those monies in a planned process for the development, both physical, economic, and otherwise, or social included, through those monies. And that was through the development of the Gram Panchayat Development Plan. Now, interestingly, these Gram Panchayat development plans are, digitally put on a networked platform, and it is available for all to see. It means it is also a capacity building effort, whereby, the villages are making their plans, putting it on the web, basically on the network. We have a platform for that. And most of them, nearly 50% of the women, are involved in this planning process. In 2015-16, there were around 59,000 Gram Panchayats who had made their plans. And today, in 2020-21, it is 56 point something, around 257,000 Gram Panchayats which have actually made their plans. So this becomes significant given the proportion of women who are a part of this planning process, with 50% or 46.5% of women who are a part of this development planning process. It becomes a more inclusive, more community-based planning process. So this has kind of turned as to be a milestone or a watermark in the history of the local governance and the women's role therein of. As a elected woman representative in Panchayat, the women folk, they have increased their influence and participation, and they have, in the Gram Panchayat development plan. Now, when we talk about linking the two, that is the disaster reduction, disaster management planning, this is where a dent can be made, knowing how it impacts the women folk, this disaster mitigation, disaster preparedness, whether it is for the shelters, whether it is for planning for the health part of it, the first aid boxes and others, all of it, and this is required, the first responders, all of it is required to be included in the Gram Panchayat development plan. Now, as we said that India is one of the first signatories, and recently we have been mandated to prepare the village level disaster management plans. And now our focus is that these village disaster management plans should be a integral part of your Gram Panchayat development plan. So that when we are talking about mitigating costs and being better prepared for the disasters, this thing would come into play there. When you have a village disaster management plan, in coastal areas, you have different cyclonic plans. Tamil Nadu, for instance, has done a fantastic job in this. They have, disaster warnings, and then they have shelters, and they have mobilized groups who would provide food during that time. They will be providing another group which will be providing medical health. Each group's work is cut out for them. So this kind of planning is now to be a focal point in the Gram Panchayat development plan. This would help mitigate the risk. And since women are involved, they would also, when we talked about the vulnerabilities of women, that part of it gets taken care of when it is the women who are actually making the planning or deciding about the decision making. So then it gives us an impetus into factoring those which perhaps might not have been at the forefront of minds while discussing the plans, if it were not for the women who were involved in the planning and management. Now, having said that, we have 45% of women in the planning and decision-making process. Is it actually so? So why do we feel that, women have largely been excluded from PRN and local governance structures in spite of the greater representation therein? There has been the issue of proxy politics, power brokering, gender-based discrimination, and they continue. Many of the women sarpanches, they have had to face violence for challenging existing power centers in the communities. Often, you find the males, they deliberately position their women. If this is a reserved seat for women, what I'll do is, as a male, if I was the last sarpanch, this time I will have my wife stand up, and I will control. And if this is one of the issues that the Panchapatis, though now, like with greater capacity building, greater involvement of women, this thing is on the wane. But still, by no means we can say that, the work has been complete. It is a work in progress, and there's a lot of work actually to be continued to be done to ensure that actual power transfer to these representatives, elected representatives, happen. So the intent and spirit of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment can only be achieved with a strong political will towards empowering Panchayat, and not just merely treating them as mere agents, that we will use them as an agents for implementing various programs or schemes in a top-down manner. It has to be autonomy. It has to be community involvement with, actual participation of women. And therein, we would like to commend the role of the Asha, Anganwadi, and self-help groups. The self-help groups have shown us the way because they have not only economically empowered, they are the part of the village poverty reduction plans, giving them financial autonomy. Now, when we talk about village disaster plans, they have to be, included so that we make a robust disaster preparedness, disaster management, post-disaster activities, all integrated, a wholesome plan where we can reduce the cost in terms of lives, in terms of money, and also acknowledge the work which is being done and which can be done by the women elected representatives, making them the shareholders in the actual governance process. So I think I'm very, very hopeful that the way ahead is quite bright, and considering the good work that has been already done, has been acknowledged, it's still a work in progress, but a good work in progress. So I think this is my time limit has about expired. So thank you again for hearing me patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving this detailed insight in the Panchayati Raj system and the work being done by the Panchayati Raj system for empowering women or mainstreaming women in disaster risk reduction. You have rightly said that women, which was earlier more considered, and in fact now also more as a caregiver, and their burden after disaster doubled or expand, as Madam Anita also said that as a caregiver, as a basic care provider. But some of the activities done by Ministry of Panchayati Raj is very appreciating, like you have mentioned about missing person, which is very important aspect of ensuring food and nutrition for women and children during disaster and in normal time also, because they are the one who are get deprived of food and nutrition aftermath of disaster, and even during because of the societal norms, even during the normal time also. You talked about national disaster management plan, as was emphasized by Ma'am Anita also. The plan do talk about social inclusion of women, or which give more emphasis on inclusion of women in DRR. There is one separate chapter of social inclusion of women in DRR. But ma'am, the part which you have emphasized more on community participation in DRR, now I feel that we can move ahead with that agenda. It's a very important agenda of community participation. You talked about village village development plan and integration of village disaster management plan in a village disaster. So that is an important window of ensuring.
Just
Yeah.
one thing I missed saying was
Yes,
the effort of capacity building and training, in which are basically we are known for capacity building and training, and herein we find that there has been a lot of focus on training of women elected representatives.
Correct.
Yeah, and especially with the focus now on disaster management to be included in the new scheme of things, to be a focus area. I think that should be a good to go situation.
Yes, ma'am. Here I also want to mention here, ma'am, like one village health sanitation and nutrition committee is also there, where ASA worker and Anganwadi workers are part of that under National Health Mission. So that is one important window where we can integrate disaster management skill-based training of first aid or some fire safety or search and rescue for women frontline worker in disaster risk reduction. And one such initiative we have taken yesterday in Karnataka, where we are training many numbers of ANMs and ASA workers in first aid, and we have opened our regional center, training center at Karnataka South Zone. We have also developed, you talked about Tamil Nadu. So last month you could not attend our program, but today was opportunity to hear you, and you rightly connected the things, ma'am, which we could not hear you last time, that at Tamil Nadu we have developed one two village disaster management plan as a model DM plan. So the two windows are now there, the village disaster development committee and village disaster management plan. So that has to be integrated in such a way at grassroots level that it should, work as a preparedness, work as an important preparedness plan for the community. You also emphasize the same part, that preparedness and mitigation is most important part, where we should invest our effort and energy so that the post-disaster scenario we are able to mitigate the impact of disasters. And women are now through this Panchayati Raj process and getting opportunity to get oriented to all this skill building, capacity building process, because they are the one who will respond first at household level. If they are not aware about the various skills, how to respond at household level, like Madam Anita has mentioned, that access to early warning system, even though they get the access to early warning system, what to do then? if they are not skilled in basic first aid and search and rescue. Even though I get the information that there is a flooding happening and I am going to get affected with that, but I'm not aware how to rescue myself. I'm not aware how to give first aid to my people who are getting affected, the old, the children. Then so it's a complete vicious cycle. We have seen the cycle of disaster management. Preparedness is very important part, as emphasized by Dr. Anita Bhatnagar Jain and yourself also, ma'am. So I think from this discussion here today, we will have more opportunity to work together and implement this program at grassroots level. So with this, now I move forward to our next speaker, who have joined us from Netherlands. She is Ms. Sandra M. Santos, Strategic Water and Governance Advisor, Research Associate. Yes.
No, please, you carry on, Tanushree.
Yeah. Netherlands, to discuss upon gender dynamics in DRR, because since morning we are listening that it is not disaster, it is inbuilt gender scenario in society which make women women are not able to access most of the information, knowledge, and so how to deal with that gender dynamic. Ma'am has also mentioned that there are certain political will is also important. So that political will is also part of those gender dynamic, because it is mainly men-headed politicians are there. So how to mitigate that gender dynamic? So we have in history we have seen that since gender equality constitute one of the history's most persistent and widespread form of injustice. We have talked about this injustice in previous two presentation. Eliminating it will call for one of the history's biggest movement for change. So it's a process of social change which we are talking about today. Women and girls are continue to suffer discrimination and violence in every part of world. It is not India, Afghanistan. It is so much inbuilt in our culture that we continue to suffer from various gender issues. Gaps in gender equality exist every sector. If we see in South Asia, only 74 girls were enrolled in primary school for every 100 boy in 1990. Now this scenario has changed to some extent, but still there is long way to go. And I think the what Madam Rekha has just discussed, that it's a stepping stone which has provided window to women to come out to their houses, to participate in decision-making process. That will certainly build a self-confidence in all those elected representatives at grassroots level. So that kind of gender dynamics are there, and we have to work continuously to mitigate that process of gender dynamic. So with this, I want to invite Ms. Sandra Santos from Netherlands, who is going to talk about gender dynamics in disaster risk governance. Ms. Sandra, I request you to kindly unmute yourself and initiate your discussion, please.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sandra Mehens. Actually, I am from Ecuador, South America. I'm living in the Netherlands almost more than 20 years, but I have large experience in issues of disaster risk management and also in water governance. That is going to be a topic that maybe for the first time we are going to interlink. I am very honored to be today with you, and actually I was quite surprised for the experience that I has been here from the people that, or the person that I has been already talking about the issue. So I will concentrate my presentation especially in some of the knowledge and experience that I had and we have in Latin American cases. So I will share my presentation with you. Please let me know it is okay, because I can see some delay in the communication.
We have given you the presentation power, Sandra. You please go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. Thank you. So you can see me now as I can. I'm going to put my on presentation mode. If something happens, just let me know because I cannot see myself.
It is very good. It is visible. You please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So let me first quickly introduce myself. As I explained you, my name is Sandra Mehens. I have been working in the Netherlands, also for the Netherlands government. It is quite hard to be as a professional from another undeveloping country, being a country where they are very skilled in some of the issues that we are already discussing today. I have 2 masters. I am a physical oceanographer, but I have some experience in water governance and environmental resource management with some speciality in remote sensing. So it is a kind of very wide knowledge over natural science. And today I am currently a PhD candidate for the University of Wageningen also in the water governance with some special focus on drought and water scarcity. But what brings to my attention about this event today, and for almost 40 years, even working in the Netherlands, I have the possibility to be as an external advisor of the Minister of Disaster Risk Reduction from Ecuador, directly to the minister at that moment that was actually a woman. During those years, it was a very deep transformation about disaster risk management in Ecuador because they understood the importance about what disaster risk management has to be in the political agenda in the government. So after those years, Ecuador was recognized globally that the efforts that they have been done in improve the capacity building about disaster risk reduction. So those figures that you are seeing now, there are most of the figures that we already see in the news every day from all these kind of international agencies. What is important, I belong from a country that is in South America, where India is 7 times bigger than Ecuador, as far as I could, 12 times bigger than Ecuador. But in the issue of disaster, there is not really a borders. Disasters is impacts in the same way, no matter how big, how large is your population, and how important or development is your place we are living. So in this case, Ecuador is a very tiny country between Colombia and Peru, but we are suffering with a lot of disasters. We are exposed actually to frequent and more intensive natural hazards that not just affect the local population, but we have large migrants living groups in our country that are coming from Venezuela, from Colombia because of army conflicts, or sometimes just to trying to find a better way of living and coming from Africa or from Haiti or Central America. What is very interesting that the international agencies that are let us know about assessments that they are doing about how many people are every year affected by the disasters. So we can see that these facts and figures sometimes they are not available to everybody. And that is something that I would like also today to discuss the perception about disaster. So as I explained you, I have a special attention nowadays in drought. and my research is in drought in Ecuador. So let me see, because I could see that it's stopping the. What specific problems have Latin America? Latin America is an enormous region where mostly part of the region, especially in the eastern part, is there is a large group of indigenous people. So this the presence of the indigenous people in Latin America are mostly related with the more vulnerable people when a disaster happens. And what is that? Because the indigenous people, that is in some way the minority in the country, always they are more affected with the disaster happens in the country. Ecuador is suffering from tsunamis, landslides, droughts, volcanics, earthquakes. And the indigenous people that are mostly living in conditions that they cannot fast response when that disaster happens. So sometimes the government is ignoring these groups, but they are not really fully in the planning or during the decisions about the local plannings in this kind of community. So the response in this case is for them to go to the streets or sometimes to block the roads to ask for attention from the government. So this strong resistance from the social movements always demands this kind of equal access, especially to the resources. But we are not talking just about indigenous people in the mountains, but we also have a large group of minority of a group of Afro-Ecuadorian people that live along the coast. And the coast, as the level rise, is one of the impacts that we have, especially in our country, and in Ecuador also belongs the Galapagos Island. So Ecuador always is exposed to these extreme weather conditions and these frequent and more intense natural hazards, affecting not just locally population, but other kind of groups. But today, because my experience on water management issues, I would like also to bring the attention about water and disaster. And why this happens? Because through the studies and the facts, water is one of the more related issues when we are talking about disaster. So the problem in some of the countries, especially in Latin America, is that not all of them recognize the importance to include also all these subjects when we are talking about disaster risk reduction management. So sometimes in the case of Ecuador, the complex frameworks in relation with water management and disaster risk reduction, they don't connect, and that is very difficult in the legal and institutional frameworks to understand that connection. There is a lack of implementation because there are a kind of competence from the resources where the issues that they are related with water as a flooding, sometimes on even landslide or even drought, they need special attention, and the resources that they are for disaster risk reduction or disaster management are different than the ones that they are located for water management issues. So there is a lack of implementation in that sense. There are no proper policies, there are no proper law, there are a water law, but there is not a disaster risk reduction law. So there is a kind of confrontation sometimes when you need to assess properly these kind of impacts when there is a disaster happens. There is also a lack of management in the conflict interests, and those have more relevance, especially in these small groups, as I mentioned. But the title of my talking today is the Gender Dynamics in Disaster Risk Governance and Resilience. And what I find very important to mention today, that we are exposed always not just to the impact to disaster, but also exposed to the hundred of concepts related with this issue. So in this occasion, I would like to bring the attention that concepts has to be fully understood. Why? Because in the moment that we deal with this kind of response to disasters, most of the time when we talk about especially authorities, there is not a clear understood about those concepts. So gender, disaster risks, governance and resilience, they are well known in some of the academic domain, technical domain, but not in the political domain. So we need in some way to sit in a table where everybody knows what we are talking and how we are going to implement those concepts. So always we see these kind of figures that especially came from the international organizations with focus on women in disaster, especially as the most vulnerable groups, where they try to bring the attention that gender matters and gender groups are affected. So we already know that natural hazards, as some of the cases that you already said, that are gender neutral, or the women mortality tend to be higher in relation to than to men, but it is also dependent which is the situation, which is the country, which is the culture, and what it is happens. But mostly disaster always impacts to the more vulnerable people and also reinforce inequality. But when we talk about disaster, we're not just talking about perception. We are talking also to real scenarios. And in the case of conflict, that is also a domain and an issue that we have to confront, especially in Latin America or in the region where I'm making my investigation, that is the transboundary region between Colombia and Ecuador. We also deal with disaster risk conflict. And then the issues or the scenarios are completely different. So there is an evidence that conflict aggravates disaster, and that disaster can intensify conflict as well. But not so much snow, because it is very sensitive sometimes to convince the governments to provide the necessary data to be able to analyze and to assess how the people that living in these regions are affected for this conflict, that there are also depending of the intensity of the conflict and the security of the issue at that moment. So universities in the Netherlands, as the Erasmus University in Rotterdam or my university of Wageningen, are dealing with this issue because it's important to have also data collected when those conflicts in those areas happens. So what is important to understand the concept of disaster risk reduction? Because provide us a critical knowledge, and we need to be critical when we are talking about disaster. We need to know how decisions are taken, how when issues cannot be prevented, how we can react, how we are dealing with exposed population, and how we are assessed and to make the proper assessment depending on the scenarios. So we need to be critical, and that is one very sensitive issue because sometimes we have to deal with sectors that they are not really open to be critical and to be criticized about things that didn't happen in the proper way. One of the main issues is because they are exposed. So that is also important that the key concepts, the principles, and the elements in DRR has to be well known. So it's about community ownership, local knowledge, traditions, because in some contexts, the groups that they are more vulnerable, they have their own way to deal with the scenarios of disaster. So we have to be close to know what the communities they are thinking about this response. That is important, the multi-stakeholder participation, the education, and the capacity building that has been mentioned in several sentences and the statements with my previous participants. And the elements of the components of DRR are also very central. That is mitigation, the vulnerability, the risk, and the hazard assessment in all states. But what is gender sensitive in intervention disaster risk reduction? Why is very important? Because women and men are different roles, and they have different roles and they have different responsibilities. And we have to access and to know how these roles and those responsibilities has to be working in the moment when a disaster happens. So that is very important to be clear about this interlinked or these relations in gender issues. So this is one of the, I like it because Dr. Anita, I think she presents these figures, and this indeed, gender inequality and disaster impact are interrelated, of vice versa. But in my case, I am implemented something different or something that makes this stronger. That is a water framework. The water governance with their principles, they are also enhancing these gender inequalities, especially when disaster impacts. The national development plans. I will explain you very briefly some experience in Latin American countries. In Ecuador, for instance, more women are strengthening their skills and abilities for mitigation and adaptation in emergency. When I was the advisor of the Minister for Disaster Risk Reduction, one of the targets was the capacity building of children in schools and women in small communities to be part, not just in the preparedness plan on the preparations, but also in the response. So we are talking about pre-disaster, post-disaster. And there are facts where women are in crisis that are leading in better way during the crisis than even with men. But what is that? Because the roles are different. Women are more in charge of the sometimes to the family surroundings, and men have another roles in the society. So the national development plans in those countries are considering those roles. So the incorporation in Honduras, for instance, of the gender approach in policy, plans and programs, that are also enhancing the position of women in the projects that they are developing, and they are more comprehensive for disaster risk management. But there are other ways how women are also involved, not just in the response, but during the crisis, and that happens in Mexico. Mexico is one of the countries with more amount of disasters during the years, but not just because the amount of disasters that they are facing, but because the impact of the kind of disaster. So they are more well prepared. They have not just women during the rescue task, but also they are already in the issues of academic level. They are prepared to be as an expert in disaster risk management. So they are not just as a part of the volunteer groups, but there are also professionals in this issue. So power and gender relations is still an issue, not just in Mexico with high level of expertise, the same as Chile, but they are also facing the cultural issues that sometimes they are limiting their action into this kind of positions. So they need also a holistic theory of risk, and they are making a lot of investigation to see and to unify criteria and concepts in the dimension of disaster risk. because they understand that not all the problems of disaster, they are not the same in all the places, and the perspective of the social construction is also different. So talking about power is also a limitation in small countries in Latin America, where they are not fully involved, not just in the planning, but also in this kind of decisions during a disaster. So the women's role is minimized because sometimes inequalities or cultural issues on those places. So on that, they are trying to bring some innovative disaster risk strategies, where in the case in Haiti, that unfortunately they already suffering some disasters, not just related with water. This is a clear example how we have to deal disaster in different way with a different perception. Not just to bring women as to victimize women, but also to present women in the perception as somebody that can be empowered, somebody that can share the responsible of taking care of others during the crisis, and somebody that has the ability to lead the moment of the crisis with the actions in that moment. So this is a clear example, especially after the earthquake in 2010 in Haiti, how things can be different and predetermined by human-made vulnerabilities. So a stop disaster part means stop with this kind of figures that always women are victimized because the effects of the impacts of the disaster. Portray the people with more dignity, especially with communication, invest in the capacity of the women, support local identity, identify priorities that sometimes didn't happen because already in authority, when this bottom-up approach, they are not taking in consideration the needs of the local people. So that is a way to say disasters have other dimensions than just the reaction, but also a specific how to perceive the how reaction or the role of the women can be. But women's and men and women should be part of this response. So gender sensitive in intervention recognize that men and women have different needs and activities, perception of risks or risk and priorities in the face of natural disaster. One of the things that we have been trying to change also in Latin America with a specific experience in Ecuador, also in Europe, in the Netherlands, as it's very a more open culture about these issues, is that understanding roles, not just bring women as supergirls or superheroes, but understanding also what it means, the role and responsibility that also men and women, they have to be in this kind of disaster or risk management. Women leadership, what is always very important, the leadership, and especially in risk resilient development, because we have been, by the facts and by the experience, women can very fast response to crisis. I have a very a statement about India and Guatemala that it can happen when we empower women in communities and how they will respond during this kind of crisis, independent of the level of and the cultural social position that can be in their own community. So when disaster, it's not really about development in a place, it is also a humanitarian issue. And this happens in all levels. There are some also good experience how we can identify these key factors. For instance, in India, as intensive training that happens, a bottom-up approach, the capacity building, but the small places, as in Central America, where they try to also to promote the leadership of women in this kind of sectors, or the advocacy in partnership building, because there are community, they are key when we are talking about community resilience, especially. But we have to go further in that, and we have to lobby to integrate these visions in the plannings and authorities, in the plannings from the governments, especially from the local governments, that they are more in charge to develop these plans and to implement this initiative. What about empowerment in disaster risk management? We have to connect. We have to connect on disaster risk reduction in global communities. We have to give more access to women to this kind of network that happens today. We are a large number of networks and platforms that women and men can be part of. I am also belongs to the Environmental Peace Building group from Washington, D.C., and we have a specific group in water and disaster reduction with men and women. They can be part. We have to engage, to encourage, to witness, and to partner globally. What we are looking to the future, the IPCC report, as 2 weeks ago, they said disaster risk is going to be central, and we have to look forward. We have to see that the elements that we already mentioned is going to bring more attention, and disasters that are going to be more extreme and exceptional with how we have been seeing in some of the countries the last days. Those are going to affect more and more the population, and this is one of my one of the last slides that I would like to introduce, and it is part of my research, because in my investigation on the issues that I am dealing with, drought, water scarcity in the framework with water governance, relations and influence are very important. It is a dealing with power, with interest, with the attitude, and has to deal with issues in the related with water, in the relocation of the communities, in the water infrastructure, in the dealing of the extreme natural events, and they have to have fully support, but they have also resistance, where this imbalance between power, interest, and attitude, they are not fully understood. So maybe that is also I has been working in this triangle from the relations and the influence, and that is the first time, because I think they have is also interconnected with the issues that we are discussing today. Some of the very brief key points to close this presentation. Disaster not is a single issue. A drought, a flood, landslide, earthquakes. So the sources are also not just a very simple. Sometimes it requires more fully understanding, more knowledge and more data to really analyze what is the source of this disaster. We have to differentiate disaster impacts because can influence gender dynamics. So understand the needs of the women and the difference with the men, it can give a big a step forwards about the disaster risk management. All actors play the game where gender is a key actor, even if we have to still make more efforts to bring the mainstream gender in this discussion. And the disaster impacts are not the same for everyone. I think that is clear for all of us. But what is my key message? Sometimes they have been talking about political representation. I also talk about political participation. When they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, but it means you always have to be present in some way. Disaster risk reduction takes women's particular needs pre, during, and post-disaster. So we have to be able to get this space to let others know what these needs are. And sometimes we are using political spaces, but we also use local social groups, and depends what is our objective, we need to be and to visualize those needs. And I also want to include some reference that I has been reading and looking forward in order to prepare this presentation for today. And I hope later we can discuss more about those issues. And always the message is for everybody. Equals means equal. This is independent, that is women or men. So it depends of what the needs are, what the objectives are, what the priorities are. Independent, the country, the location of the position. And disaster is disaster, a gender, a political rather than social. I guess I left this last figure or the slide for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Sandra, for this presentation. And you have rightly said, equal means equal. And I think in current scenario, we need to bring that folding chair with us, because it is really difficult to ensure a chair with the table in the current scenario. Thank you, Sandra. You largely talked about mass movement and conflict, which is very common across all the presenters we have seen since morning, that mass movement is one of the important crisis, upcoming crisis in future we can foresee. You talked about various women group which are working at Ecuador, and they are trying to enhance their skills. And this platform certainly provides us an opportunity to compare or to learn from each other. Like in India, this is a down-top approach of PRI, which is supporting in mainstreaming of women in DRR. And their fisher women are doing a lot of work for mitigating the impact of disaster. They are learning. So these international platform provide us with an opportunity to learn from each other. Certainly, with common learning, which I could see that access to information, knowledge, and resources enhance our self-confidence also, and plus our skills to respond after disaster. Community partnership is an important aspect, and community, if we enhance community capacity, community ownership, we will be able to mitigate the impact of disaster, because a lack of knowledge about the hazard and how to address those hazards, because community is the ultimate beneficiaries of any program, and if they are not equipped enough to respond effectively to any hazard, they are going to be the ultimate sufferer. Some important point of for women you have quote, like to connect, to access, to assess, to engage, to encourage, and to witness, to partner. These are the very important point I think we should carry from your presentation. With this, I have some announcement that since we are running out of time, so those who have any query, kindly give your questions in chat box. We will select 5 suitable questions in the end of the program, because many questions are coming up which are not much relevant to our topic today and the resource person which is available with us. So 5 questions we'll select from the chat box. And with this, I want to invite our next presenter, Mr. Assis Panda, who is working with the National Institute of Disaster Management and working with the Government of India Central Secretariat Office since 2011, and have vast experience of disaster risk reduction. He also worked with Ministry of Home Affairs for some time, and he will be discussing on the status of women in disaster risk reduction issues and challenges. As we know that in disaster management context, generally women are considered into a perspective. Women as more vulnerable section to society, requiring special attention. And secondly, regarding the participation of women in different stages of disaster risk reduction. So today we are trying to take a step forward from women as a beneficiaries, as a victim, to how to make them equal partner in the process of decision making in disaster risk reduction. Various factors may be taken into consideration while discussing women in disaster management, like social, economic situation, and gender norm. So as Dr. Bhatnagar also discussed, that while disaster do not discriminate, but society do, as there are perpetuating social pattern of discrimination, and this pattern causes certain groups of people to suffer more, and including women. So women in disaster are often found to be most vulnerable group because of their exposure to the higher risk, and they are not able to have access to various solutions which government or society are trying to provide them. They do not have access because of this societal norms and issues. So I welcome you, Mr. Panda, for your presentation. I will request you to kindly stick to the time because we are running short of time. Thank you, Mr. Panda. You can kindly unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear my voice, please?
Yes, yes, sir. Sir.
Okay, and the presentation is visible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, first of all, thanks to Zoom for Solution for inviting me for this talk. The three wonderful women leaders and stalwarts in their own fields, and the kind of presentation they have given. So, I don't think there is much left with respect to the topic that has been given to me, issues and challenges. Anita ma'am, I worked with Anita ma'am in the year 2011-12 when I was in the disaster management division of Ministry of Home Affairs. Wonderful talk by Anita ma'am. She set the context very rightly, the kind of issues and challenges that women folk face in the field of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Rekha ma'am also, Ministry of Panchayati Raj, wonderfully captured the local governance level, the kind of situations that we are facing and the kind of solutions the local governance is providing to them. And wonderful presentation by Sam with respect to the kind of case studies in the Guatemala and this Ecuador kind of places, the kind of initiatives that have been taken and that is bearing fruits right now. So thank you so much to all the three women leaders for their wonderful talks prior to me. So I will stick to time, 15 to 20 minutes I will take for covering the way I see the issues and challenges with respect to status of women in DRR as far as my country is concerned. This pictorial scenario, if you see the kind of patriarchal society that we have in our India and most of the states and union territories, the kind of set context with respect to gender issues, the kind of upbringing that the male and even female children they get in the years of their developments. So those kinds of mindset, I mean, they don't allow us rather to allow the women folk to come forward with respect to having a decision-making role, having a participatory role, or kind of facilities they should be getting in the disaster management cycle. The three important aspects: the pre-disaster scenario, continuing of disaster scenario, and specifically the post-disaster scenario, vis-a-vis the kind of situation we see in the climate change, climate crisis issues that we are observing in the 21st centuries and things like that. Most of the things have already been discussed because of the biological their makeup, and in a non-disaster scenario, the kind of economic, social, and psychological and disadvantages the women folk they already carry in a country like India. So when the disaster strikes, it manifolds the kind of disturbances and psychosocial care issues that erupts and kind of physical damages and mental injury they have to face through. So the loss of their near dears, the loss of emotional reactions with respect to that, and the needs in a post-disaster scenario, they have to observe the loss of basic amenities and security issues also in the camps. Sometimes they are kept in a post-disaster scenario. So lots of issues are there. Some of the sections of women folk could be needing legal help also in a post-disaster scenario or during disaster scenario. And other than that, the kind of knowledge base the indigenous women they have with themselves, we kind of ignore those knowledges. So if they are willing and they're willing to partner in the planning and policy making framework of thing and also in the implementation part, then they should definitely be included and involved in these processes if we really want their real inclusion in the DRR processes and things as far as a country like India is concerned. Now, because of their biological makeup and because of the already in a non-disaster scenario, the kind of disadvantages they are already a disadvantaged group of our society. Then again, in the disadvantaged section of the society, there are subsections of women, pregnant, lactating women, disabled women, women on critical healthcare facilities, then women with prior history of psychiatric ill, and so on and so forth. There will be 15 to 16 such subsections which need specific kind of attention in a disaster scenario or in a post-disaster scenario. So those specific needs have to be identified and taken care of. in a disaster kind of situation. The kind of gender concerns that we face because of socio-economic conditions, because of the cultural beliefs and things that is embedded in our societal systems, traditional systems. So they have to face increased loss of livelihoods, gender-based violence is also in a post-disaster scenario, and even loss of life during the disaster kind of scenario. Two examples I can quote: the Indian tsunami of 2004, because of less likely of their knowing swimming, and because of the physical attire, the kind of clothes they have to wear in India, it is very, very difficult to expect them to come out of tsunami as saved. I mean, it's very difficult to save them in this kind of situations. Another example of Bangladesh, this cyclone Gorky, where more than 140,000 people died. Then this population proportion of women which face this death toll, that is 14 to 1, rightly mentioned by Tanushi ma'am in the beginning. So this ratio is uncalled for. This is injustice. I mean, this is 14 to 1. I mean, one male person is dying in a tsunami kind of situation, a cyclone kind of situation, and 14 women are going to perish. This is uncalled for, and we have to definitely move towards those directions where we can think of disaster resilient society and this climate resilient society and things like that. So because of the pre-existing gender bias, women are already poor, already more vulnerable, and also we see them as a weak section of our society, passive section of society, incapacitated victims of the society in times of disaster. But the truth is, various sections of women and girl child, they work so actively in a disaster kind of situation. If at all they are given their roles properly, if they are allowed to contribute in these kind of situations, the things will be very, very different. We have to only change our mindset. If we talk about the recent climate change scenarios, 21st century, we are observing many climate change issues, climatic crisis. One situation and one report says that additional 2.5 lakh climate-related deaths per year is expected between 2030 to 2050. The recent report of this IPCC Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, it has shown a very grim face of scenario. The kind of seen, I mean, the global temperature has risen to 1.1 degrees Celsius if in comparison to the pre-industrialized times. In all these climate crisis scenarios, the lot of our society that gets hugely impacted, that is women and girl child, because they are the section of our society which are the last to eat in a family, in a normal situation. Forget about any disaster. They are the last to get rest. They are last to be rescued in a disaster kind of situation. They face greater health and safety risks because of this lack of natural resources, that like this water, this sanitation issues. They get compromised and things like that. So their job in these kind of scenarios of disaster that get enhanced like anything, domestic issues, domestic violences, sexual abuse and things like that, they get enhanced like anything. Their contribution is often overlooked in the humanitarian and climatic action, and practical needs are forgotten. We have to change our mindset with respect to that. Now, they are suffer like anything. One report says that 71% of 1.3 billion people that get affected during disasters, or socially, if we say the poverty-ridden section of our society, so 71% that belongs to the women folk. And the irony of the fact is, in developing kind of country where we have this agriculture-based economy, the women contribute to 50 to 80% as far as the agriculture and food production is concerned. But as far as their ownership of the land is concerned, that is less than 10%. You go to nearest area, you go to Latin America or Caribbean, everywhere the same situation. The rural women, they are hugely dependent on natural resources, and to collect those natural resources, they have to go miles and miles put together and devote their 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours time to collect this water, fuel, water, and things like that to carry upon the domestic course of things that is laden upon them to work, because this is their duty that we perceive, because being women, there is their duty to run the family and to collect these natural resources. So they have got limited access to and control of environmental services, so they have limited chances to save their own life or the lives that's dependent upon them, like the children and the disadvantaged sections like elderly people or the people who are dependent on women like anything. That is very, very important to unlearn ourselves from these things and start giving proportions of that right to women folk in the society, so that we can think of disaster resilient society. They are effective actors and agents with respect to change of climates, the mitigation aspects, the adaptation aspects. You give them certain kind of knowledge and the kind of result that you will observe that will be far, far more better in comparison to the male folks, male society. There is a strong body of knowledge and expertise that should be utilized with respect to mitigation, with respect to adaptation, and the responsibilities in the households, day-to-day work, what they are doing, that makes them stewards of natural and household resources. They should be recognized. We have to identify gender-sensitive strategies to respond to environmental and humanitarian crises caused by not only climate change, but also increasing trend of disasters, issues, be it natural, be it man-made. So certain sectors I want to cover: the agriculture and food security sector, because of this climate change and disasters increasing. The ramifications are food availability is decreasing like anything. Accessibility is very, very less. Also, the price of this food sources, depletion of traditional food sources is one issue. Another issue is in times of disaster, it increases like anything. In both the situations, the sufferer is women and girl child because of the unpredictable and scarce nature of these resources, and they have to go farther of miles to collect these kinds of resources, and also because less finances they have with them, the authority they have over the decision making system with respect to the finance of that family or that community, they are they are having more problem with respect to accessing the foods when the prices of this food increases in the times of disaster. So we have this our responsibility with ourselves to ensure rights of rural women with regard to food security and non-discriminatory approach with respect to their participation of having a command over the collection of resources and also get the benefit out of outcome of those resources. That is very, very important. If we talk about the biodiversity, so Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report says that because of climate change, it is going to be a very dominant driver for the loss of biodiversity by the end of this century. And this has been corroborated by the recent IPCC report that we are in a very grim kind of situation with respect to not only biodiversity, but also natural resource conservation. That is why this 2021 to 2030, that scenario, the time zone has been depicted as the decade of ecosystem restoration. When we use the term of restoration, it means certain losses has already been identified with respect to that. So in terms of ecological conservation with respect to ecological restoration, until unless the 50% population, as was rightly mentioned by Anita ma'am in her beginning talk, of our population across the globe, if we don't give them equal right, if we don't give them equity-based scenario or the approach, forget about the kind of scenario that we are observing for ourselves. By 2100, where Paris Climate Change Agreement asks us to reduce, keep a tap on the increase of temperature below 2 degrees Celsius and if possible 1.5 degrees Celsius. So women and girls become more vulnerable in these kinds of scenarios because of the injuries they might be getting when they have to carry heavy loads of natural resources by covering long distances. Also during this process, they might be facing some kind of sexual abuse or sexual harassment in those their areas. So that is also very important. If we talk about the indigenous women across the globe, they are the repository of this traditional wisdom with respect to how climate should be seen, how climate should be change has to be adhered to, and how we have to go for adaptation. They are having wealth of knowledge with themselves with respect to environment, with respect to wild ancestors of food, medicinal plants, aromatic plants, and also the kind of domestic animals they need to keep in times of changing climates, so that we can sustain ourselves in this changing climate times. So greater inclusion of indigenous women, indigenous communities, that is very, very important with respect to validating the significance of this knowledge, and also this knowledge clubbed together with the science and technology innovations that is going globally. The success stories like Ecuador and other places that ma'am mentioned, we can bring them to our own country and replicate by customizing to the local needs of the local people, especially the women folk. We talk about the water resources, it gets depleted, groundwater level gets depleted, the floods and drought situations are increasing. The overall precipitation, if you observe across the globe, that is not changing that much, but that incessant rainfall, a short time duration, lots of precipitation takes place. So two pronged outcomes that we have to face with respect to that flash floods that takes place in most of the places globally, and also after this flash flood, when there is no rain, we have to face drought kind of situation. In both these kind of situations, women folk have to face this drudgery of collecting natural resources. They have to go miles put together with respect to collecting water and fuel and fodder for their own family. Another issue is contamination in these times of this flooding and things like that. One example I can put: arsenic. This increased flood levels intensify rate of exposure to women while collecting water. So health issues are associated with respect to that: lesions, hardening of the skin, dark spots on hands and feet. There are swollen limbs and also loss of feeling, the kind of scenarios they have to face while collecting this water because of direct and regular contact with arsenic contaminated water. So adverse impact with respect to their social that inclusion in the society. Women, this kind of women who are observing these kind of changes, physical changes, they are shunned, they are excluded, they are stigmatized. They are, people are not ready to marry these girl childs and who are having these kinds of health issues. So inadequate access to water and poor water quality is going to enhance in times to come, and accordingly we have to ponder over these important issues while giving importance to their rights with respect to DRR and climate change adaptations. As far as health sector is concerned, there is instances of increased morbidity and mortality with respect to heat waves, floods, storms, fires, and droughts. Then there will be vector-borne diseases that is increasing. It is also going upwards also to those areas where, because of the this less temperature, these vector-borne diseases were not there 20 years, 30 years, 40 years back. But now those malaria, dengue are visible in, if you go to Uttarakhand and Himalayan states in our country. So because of this, the women folk are getting impacted like anything because of this seasonal migration. The man folk, they leave their agriculture, they move on to bigger cities for finding other options of livelihood, but they leave these women folk, the girl child behind, and they have to face these kinds of health issues, health hazards, and we have to think about these issues also. So increase in prevalence of diseases, it also aggravates women's capacity to take care of their family. If a woman gets sick, then it tantamounts to not getting services by other family members in their family. That is also very, very important. Why we need to give health protection to women, why we need to give education to women, like Tanusha ma'am rightly mentioned in the beginning. If we teach a woman, we are probably teaching the whole family. If we are teaching a girl child, probably we are teaching the entire future of our this society. This is a wonderful quotation with respect to why we need to give right to women folk with respect to when they need to give birth to child. It is common sense that when women are able to plan their pregnancies, populations grow much, as a result, so do greenhouse gas emissions. So providing access to contraception and preventive healthcare services to women folk should be one of the many effective strategies used to fight climate change. So this is a wonderful quotation. Women should be given the right to when to bear the child and what should be the number of childs she wants to bear and things like that. So women are that important in our society, and we should be given them due importance with respect to that. Migration is one of the secondary impact with respect to any kind of disaster. Population has to move from one place to other places. In these kind of scenarios, women again and the girl child, they have to face the consequences like anything. Because of the social beliefs, the customs, or the kind of attire they have to wear, it is very difficult for them to move from one place to other places, carrying the household that assets and things like that, carrying the old age people with them, carrying the children who can barely walk and things like that. So be it because of this climate change issues, the temperatures are rising like anything. Is coastal population, that is one important aspect. Like if the temperature rises by 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, so probably this coastal population of this Kochi, this Mumbai or Sundarban areas, or this Maldives and things like that, places like that, the population has to move to the mainland. So in this kind of this population displacement, women folk are going to suffer like anything. One example I can quote: Cyclone Nargis in 2008 in Myanmar that saw this population migration of 2.4 million people, and you can just assume the kind of situation women and girl child might have to face in those kinds of situations. So this migratory consequences brings lots of death rates for women in less developed countries because of the less of assets and facilities that is being provided, services provided to the women folk. And also it brings behavioral restrictions and poor access to information for the women folk in times of migration. If we talk about energy, Santa Ma'am was using on slide with respect to the power sector. See, when we talk about renewable energy in times of this climate change, the climate change mitigation technology has to be adopted like anything. But when energy comes to our mind, primarily what we think, it is electricity to operate appliances, equipment, gasoline, diesel fuels for motors, and so on and so forth. So our mindset says, because of the training that we have got, these jobs are related to only manpower. So women are not expected to be involved in power generation and things like that. This is one important lacuna that we have to address like anything. So because of this lacuna, women and men face differences in training and social expectations with respect to, this was one example I quoted. There are several examples where we can see we are not going to offer equity to women with respect to the kind of training, skill development, or the kind of job they might be doing better than male folks, but we are not going to provide them situations and scenarios and opportunities with respect to that. Human rights is a very important aspect because of these extreme weather conditions, increasing trend of disasters, whether man-made or natural disasters. The human rights is going to be one important aspect where these women folk are probably going to suffer like anything. This situation in Afghanistan, we are observing the kind of scenarios we are seeing for women folk. We can only feel sorry for them. So the whole global community should put together. I've seen the chat box. There was one mention that the whole global community should come forward to putting pressure on the governance over there, local Taliban over there, so that they are going to behave with women nicely. So human rights issue is one important aspect. The secondary impact of any disaster, where women and girl child face the the crux of this negative impacts like anything. So we have to ensure that, and also this is also in line with the key UN priority, where UN says that we have to safeguard the human rights of people whose lives are most adversely affected, and women are one part of that disadvantaged section of our society. As far as women and girls are concerned, they should be at the core of the DRR. As mentioned by Sendai Framework or Disaster Risk Reduction, it gives significant importance on human rights, gender equality, and climate change adaptation issues. Gender has always been a key component, but has been deprived the important kind of importance it needs to be given. And if we go for gender as keeping a key component, it addresses the underlying causes and drivers of disasters, and which are going to change the scenario, which were responsible because of the ill-conceived developmental policies, ill-conceived practices and investment that we have made in the past few decades or century put together. So these gap areas like this participation in decision making, the gap areas like resource management, their say in the resources, their say in the decision making with respect to what kind of plan should be there with respect to disaster risk reduction of the women folk. So that is there. We have these kinds of gap, and accordingly we have to remove these gender inequalities. We have to go for sidelining. I mean, when we sideline them from planning, basically we are putting them more in front of the disaster risk, and we are leaving them alone to get the impacts of disaster. So that should not be the process. We have to go as per the SFDRs, our own nationalized goals, that every country is supposed to make nationalized goals with respect to SFDRR, Paris Climate Change Agreement, and SDGs, and accordingly we have to plan things, put women at the driver's seat like this. Sandra ma'am said they have to bring their holding chairs. So that should not be situations. Seats should be there, and males should rise from those seats and allow women to sit on those seats where they can decide upon their own future. So gender sensitive responses, if we want to bring into the climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, we have to bring those technological advancements which are going to take care of women issues. We have to honor the indigenous knowledge that women leaders carry with themselves, and also bring traditional practices at the forefront, club together with the science and technology innovation that is already there globally. So there should be a scientific and logical mixing of these two kinds of knowledge sets, and also allow this information should reach in a user-friendly manner, in an affordable manner, and effective and sustainable manner in local language, where women can understand these kinds of mix of knowledge and technological innovations. Also, financing schemes mechanism should be so flexible that a very low interest rate, this women folk can take loans for self-help groups to bring climate change adaptation measures in the local level, and also go for disaster risk reduction on their own with respect to their own lot, and also for the entire community if they want. So participation is very, very important, and also we have to ensure gender sensitive investments in our local plans and schemes of things. If We talk about the emergency measures during natural disasters. We have to keep them at the forefront. We have to keep them in our planning processes and decision-making systems, so that be it cyclones, floods, or disasters where mobility is required, so they will be prepared in such a fashion because of these early warning systems. So these early warning systems informations should be disseminated in such a fashion that the last mile connectivity that should be achieved, and women folk who are sitting inside their houses, cyclone, tsunamis and earthquakes and things like that, they should get the information prior so that they can prepare for their displacement for those places, carrying their children, carrying the elderly people who are dependent upon them and things like that. Now, somebody in the chat box talked about the sustainable development goals. Why we are not doing, we are not talking about that. See, many goals are there, 17 goals are there. Out of that, 11 goals pertain to disaster risk reduction issues. Out of that, like this SDG 11, it talks about women's equal rights over the cities and resources. SDG 7 talks about the energy, that power sector I talked about, their roles and things like that. SDG 6 talks about the women playing important role with respect to provisioning the household water and sanitation things, and their say upon making decisions on those issues, so on and so forth. Many SDGs, but one rider is there, one caution is there by the global community. That is SDG 5. It says gender equality is central to all the SDGs. And if it is not achieved, the implementation of all the goals will be compromised. So until unless you achieve SDG 5, forget about all other SDGs. It is not going to serve any purpose. 50% population of the globe, if they are not involved in these kinds of aspects of all SDGs, Paris Climate Change Agreement or DRR and things like that, then it is total futile. I mean, you are not serving the purpose. So this is very, very important. Thanks to the person who raised this question in the chat box. Now, last 2-3 slides. If we talk about the way forward, definitely we have to bring gender perspective in a plan and policies, and also carry out systematic gender analysis. We don't have sets disaggregated data. So establishing gender sensitive benchmarks and indicators, we have to bring this population into consideration, and accordingly we have to bring them at the forefront at the decision making our systems also. Be it climate change adaptation, be it disaster risk reduction, they are unique and valuable perspectives that should be respected, that should be brought to the fore, and they are seeing the things in the kind of perspective they are observing. That is very, very important with respect to that. Then there are areas like crediting that financing schemes at low interest rates that I mentioned, and also the kind of trainings and skill developments, and also IT sector developments and the skill sets, science and technology innovation, that should be brought to the fore at the places where the women are there, and at the local language, so that their capacity can be enhanced in such a fashion that their contribution can be seen globally or nationally, subnationally, or at the district and the local level. Slide is moving, please. Nakulji?
You are at way forward. Yes.
Yeah, now it is conclusion. Okay,
Yeah,
this
now
is the last slide. So basically, what SFDRR says, it says, first understand the disaster risk. That was the item number 4 in the Hugo framework of disaster risk reduction. So now SFDRR says, first understand the problem. The moment we understand the lacuna, we understand that yes, we are not dealing with the women issues like the way we should understand and deal with, then 50% your goal has already been achieved. That is important. Equity and inclusive growth is very, very important. 50% population, if they are not involved in decision making processes, then we are not going to solve the purposes. So inclusiveness is very, very important. And when we talk about equity, 50% responsibility, then probably we have to give more to women folk right now, so that 10 years hence, 20 years hence, 30 years hence, they would be getting that real equity that we are talking about. So participatory management, that should be the motto. Decision making involvement, that should be the opportunity that we have to give to them. All kinds of skill development sets that should be developed for women folk in the local language and in the time zone, like when they are able to take these kinds of skill development courses or things like that. So we have to accordingly prepare our courses in such a fashion. Then the land and resources ownership, that is very, very important. Like 50 to 80%, I mentioned in one of my slides, the agriculture, forestry, and the sport production systems, they are contributing. But as far as ownership of the land is concerned, that is less than 10% across the globe. So that has to be enhanced. If they are putting that much effort and tilling the that forestry, agriculture sector, agroforestry sector, then they have to be given the real responsibility. Then comes that sense of belongingness. And this is very, very important. Easy finance is important for women folk by providing them interest-free or rather less interest rate loans, and self-help groups formation, NGOs formation, that is very, very important. And also awareness with respect to the kind of government welfare schemes at the national, subnational, or the district level that has to be disseminated to the local women folks. And also technology-centric information, technology-centric planning and policy, that is important. And replication of success stories like Sandra ma'am, if she is talking about success stories of her countries, then we should learn from these processes. We should bring those technologies or those knowledge to our local levels, customize them to the local needs, and accordingly provide solutions to the local problems over there. So women empowerment she talked about. Plethoras of women empowerment issues are there, and by providing empowerment to the women, we are probably serving ourselves, the whole of the community. We are taking the society to the disaster resilient concept. We are taking to the society to the climate sensitive resilient concept, and probably then only if we empower the women, we are going to see all these processes that we are going through, the wonderful talks by our women leaders, and the kind of concepts they mentioned, we are going to see them fulfilled in times to come. So thank you so much for having me here. This is the last slide. In our country, it is said that Naryastu Pujante Ramantre Tasa Devta Tatrastu Pujante Falaha Kriya. It says that where women are honored, divinity blossoms there, and where they are dishonored, all actions remain unfruitful. But this is the old Sanskrit couplet in my country. Today's women in my country, or the girl child, what they are saying, don't honor us as Devi. Don't worship us. Give us equity. I mean, if you give us opportunity at our doors, probably we are going to fulfill all the dreams of the whole community, the whole mankind, and definitely we are going to be a strong force to reckon with as far as climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction is concerned. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Panda. And you rightly said that we don't need honor, we need equity. We need equity. And the person like you as a counterpart in male community, I think with the kind of vision you have and the knowledge you have shared today, I think we are going to able to achieve those scenario one day, that where we will be able to participate equally and step by step with various initiatives. We are doing that process. We are in the process of reaching that platform. Thank you, Mr. Panda, for this very, very informative presentation. You talked about impact of climate change on women. Women as a provider must be recognized. Even if they are a provider or caregiver, their roles must be recognized. In various sectors, how women can play an important role, their scenario, their status around the globe. Thank you, Mr. Panda. It was a very informative presentation by you. And now, I think we should move ahead with our next presenter. We have often seen that power structure create imbalance between men and women, leading to inequitable control over resource and opportunities, including the exclusion of one gender from the decision-making process and leadership. And we are continuously talking on this point that we need more opportunity to be included in the process of decision-making in leadership. It is a systematic discrimination we have talked about that exclude us in the process of decision making and exclude us from those opportunities. It is important to learn various capacity building skills and mainstream us in the process of DRR and shift us from the role as a victim to the equal partner in the process of DRR. Lack of capacities result from prevailing socioeconomic and political inequality, make women and children more vulnerable to various disasters. We talk about one example of Guatemala from fisher women community and how they are responding to the disaster risk reduction. And we have our next presenter from Sri Lanka, Ms. Sulekha Pereira, who is Program Quality and Design Analyst for UNDP Sri Lanka Country Office, Sri Lanka. And she will be talking on one such example of fisher women and their role in mitigating flood hazard, case study from the Sri Lanka. Because we have seen that social equality in DRR intervention is not only a legal requirement, it is also a moral imperative, and literature are full of the evidences that disaster vulnerability of traditional marginalized community are existing everywhere. Community who are marginalized are vulnerable to various kind of hazard. But those community, through their cultural practices deep rooted in their community, including traditional wisdom and local knowledge and resources, are able to cooperate or cope with the impact of disaster locally. So when threatened by any hazard, these indigenous community often respond by making use of all their traditional knowledge and local practices, which have evolved over generation, and will continue to adapt to the future changes. And largely, we are working in the field of DRR, but we are not aware of this traditional knowledge or indigenous practices. We have heard of many cases during the tsunami also, that how Sri Lankan community or tribal community of Andaman and Nicobar saved themselves from the tsunami through their local knowledge and practices. So I welcome you, Madam Pereira, for your discussion, and I request you to kindly unmute yourself. And on one more request, to kindly remain confined to the time slot, since we are running out of time. And Ms. Pereira, kindly go ahead with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Can I share my screen? Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am, Pereira.
Is it in the presentation mode? Okay. So once again, thank you so much. And also I take this opportunity to thank Zone 4 Solutions for organizing this. And this topic is like very important topic in disaster risk reduction in moving forward. So as you said, most of the previous presenters covered very important areas of women engagement and leadership in DRR. I will make my presentation very brief and light, considering the time limitations we have. So today, as Tanushree mentioned, my topic is fisher women and their role in mitigating flood hazards. So before I go to the topic, I will very briefly give an overview of Sri Lanka's disaster situation. Sri Lanka has a record of many and diverse natural disasters. So the 2004 tsunami being the worst one. In addition to that, we have floods, landslides, droughts are other main disasters in the country. As previous presenters mentioned, also disasters have a significant destruction to lives, livelihoods, and assets on people and communities. So this is not an exception for Sri Lanka also. So moreover, these disasters have a huge impact on the economy, like sometimes which reverse our development gains. So when it comes to statistics, 64% of annual disaster losses come from floods, and based on that we can consider floods is the main disaster Sri Lanka faces on yearly basis. So from the recent past, climate change has aggravated the impact in terms of both frequency and intensity, like making the disaster impact worse for vulnerable people. On top of climate change, actually, COVID-19 also has worsened the impacts of disasters on people, lives, and livelihoods. So it's double impact now. Now, Sri Lanka gets rain from basically two monsoons, southwest and northeast. Southwest monsoon is the main culprit. It brings 75% of country's annual rain, and on the other hand, it makes floods in most of the areas of the country, especially in southwest areas. So out of this, you can see from this map what are the main flood-prone areas in the country. And out of these flood-prone areas, coastal areas are more vulnerable to floods, especially districts like Mana and Putla. And also, like approximately 33% of Sri Lanka's population live in coastal areas, and about 1,337 fishing villages are on the coastal belt. And coastal fisher communities suffer from floods every year. One reason is like their geographical location, because mostly their settlements are in low-lying areas and floodplains, and also like their settlements are more like semi-permanent, and their economic level also add to this vulnerability. So basically, coastal fisher communities suffer from floods more than other communities in our country. So when it comes to women in coastal areas, so their fishing is the main livelihood of people in the coastal areas. Of course, tourism also now is a main livelihood option, but mostly it's fishing. And women play a critical role in fishery activities, and they are also the primary givers for their families as well. So women's engagement in maintaining social and social networks and community work is higher compared to other rural settings, because most of the time men in coastal areas are in the sea for extended period of time. So women have to like contribute to economic activities, then a caregiving role at home, and also community work as well. So this this situation give them a like opportunity to like get engaged and also demonstrate leadership skills, but it's a huge, it poses a considerable burden to their day-to-day lives. So when it comes to disasters, so no need to mention that as previous speakers also like spoke in detail. In countries where gender discrimination is tolerated, women and girls are particularly vulnerable to natural hazards. So the percentage of women and girls who die in disasters are higher, and the incidences of gender-based violence is also known to increase exponentially during and after disasters. The Tsunami Survey 2004 by the Department of Census and Statistics in Sri Lanka states that women and children are 14 times more likely to die from such disasters than men. So in overall, disaster impacts on women are much more than men, not only in terms of mortality, but also from economic and other social aspects as well. So when it comes to women's role in coastal fisher communities at flood situations, when it comes to mitigation in our like Sri Lankan setting, women's role in flood mitigation activities like drainage cleaning and putting flood bunds. So their role is little limited. Men takes the leading role there, but they are giving a supporting role there. But women play a catalytic and critical role in disaster preparedness and also in relief activities. They involved in preparation of food, taking care of children, the elderly and the sick, provide safety for other women and children, support women with special needs such as breastfeeding mothers and elderly, and also support for relief distribution and other relief related activities. So if I quickly give an update on a brief on how women's engagement in before, during and post flood. Before floods, women engaged in keeping ready some food, then firewood and energy, then ensure family assets are protected, for example, keep them in higher elevations, then sought support from neighborhood, keep savings, borrow money, and clean the canals, facilitate drainage activities, and also clean the surrounding. During flood, like they involve in safety and security of the children and elders, safety of belongings and important items, evacuation to safe locations with their relations, neighbors, and like support to maintain safety centers, feed children and elderly, and also they get involved in health and hygiene aspects as well. So in post-flood, they involve in cleaning and sanitation, family nutrition, and health and safety. So before, during, and post-flood, they have a like huge role to play in disaster settings. So here I will share a small case study from Sri Lanka. UNDP, in collaboration with the Ministry of Disaster Management, we have conducted post-disaster needs assessment for 2016 floods, 2017 floods, and also support the government to develop a recovery framework for flood preparedness. Inclusion and also leave no one behind are the main principles we followed, but it was very challenging due to lack of disaggregated data. Always, like as previous speakers mentioned, disaster affect men and women differently. So their needs are different. In this gender sense, it is very important that in assessment, gender aspects are like properly mainstream or incorporated to enable evidence-based decision making. So like lack of gender disaggregated data was a huge challenge for us in incorporating or like carrying out gender sensitive assessments. Again, I want to share a good lesson learned from our exercises. We are in the process of establishing a early warning system for flood-prone areas. So, unlike in other areas, fishing communities are like very much vocal and engaged. So we like promote their engagement in flood preparedness and early warning activities. But the like sad part is now, for example, we plan to send these early warning messages to the people in the flood prone areas through SMSs, but we realized that mostly men on the mobile phone, so women don't get information on early warning flood situations at the right time. So digital literacy was also a huge barrier to promote women leadership in disaster situation. That was also seen as a barrier. And in 2020 onwards, we had to incorporate COVID measures in safety centers. So unlike in other instances, women demonstrated their leadership skills more than ever in ensuring COVID measures are adhered to, like, for example, keeping records, temperature measurements, ensuring social distances. I think Madam Anita mentioned, COVID-19 also have a major impact on women, but still they demonstrated a very visible leadership in incorporating COVID-19 guidelines into flood preparation activities. So basically, when it comes to barriers, So I will quickly go through these barriers. No need to mention there are enormous barriers for women to play a leadership role in disaster management activity. Mainly because women's capacity is not adequately recognized in the society. They are always seen as a vulnerable category. So their capacity is not adequately recognized. So women have a lot of mobility and also like cultural issues. Then they do not have adequate savings to cope up with disaster situations. Women do not receive enough information at the right time, especially information regarding to early warning. And also women have limited access to training and awareness program. Not only for training and awareness program, in overall, they have limited access to other resources as well. So in addition, alcoholism among fisher communities is a major issue that leads to increased gender-based violence and child abuse in these areas. And this increases in disaster settings, especially. So when it comes to recommendations, I think these areas were discussed enough, but for the completion, I will take you through some recommendations. So women must be positioned as active stakeholders, not as passive stakeholders, but as active stakeholders and decision-making makers in DRR efforts in a systematic way. So to do that, we need to have the political will. So that is also a major issue or the gap in promoting women's leadership in disaster risk reduction activities. Also, provisions should be given in policies for positive discrimination for women considering their increased vulnerability. So ensuring equity. In Sri Lanka, most of the disaster management related policies or main plans like nationally determined contribution also gender aspects are not properly recognized. And also gender should be adequately mainstreamed in vulnerability assessment because assessments gives us a platform to take evidence-based decisions. So gender should be like properly reflected and should be incorporated in vulnerability assessments and national development plans and also in especially disaster preparedness and other disaster related plan. Gender disaggregated data is very important, and also through this data and evidence we need to explore opportunities to improve access to resources for women and also include women in informal, formal and informal education, trainings and awareness, and provide opportunities for them to raise their voice and build confidence of women to take that leadership role. Sometimes even though we like create an enabling environment for women leadership, it is at the same time, it's very important that we empower women to take that leadership role. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Pereira. You in detail discussed about role of community women in various phases of disaster risk reduction. And here I want to reiterate the fact which has been emphasized by Madam Rekha also, that the self-help group or community women group are playing an important role in pre-disaster also, because they have that economically, they have reached to that economic empowerment level that they are able to contribute to the post-disaster scenario also as an equal partner. So these village level groups of women certainly enhance their capacity, their self-confidence to respond to any disaster. With this, I think we now reach to the last presenter of our program. Just want to invite Sri Engineer Avdesh Kumar. He is working with the Department of Civil Engineering in University, India. Mr. Kumar has vast knowledge in disaster risk management and is currently also involved with National Institute of Disaster Management India for developing Indian Disaster Management Report 2019. As we know that during the ASEAN Ministerial Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction 2016, Honorable Prime Minister of India announced 10-point agenda for DRR. All-inclusive agenda presented in that program has a holistic approach for disaster risk management and address whole range of issues, including building local community capacity initiatives, to use of innovative technology, and also encouraging greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk management. Mr. Abdhes will be talking more on this PM Agenda 3 as per his talk. So I'll request Abdhes ji to kindly unmute yourself and initiate your presentation. I will also request you to kindly stick to the timing because we are already running late for the program. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, without taking much time, I would like to start my presentation because I know this is a time where everyone is waiting for his lunch. And before me, you have heard many, some eminent speaker of the world, like Dr. Anita Bhatnagar madam, and Rekha ma'am, and Ashish Panda sir, and Sandra ma'am. And before me, Ashish Panda sir also delivered excellent presentation. And from Sri Lanka, experiences were shared by Surekha Pereira ma'am. And they all covered a wide spectrum related to the women leadership in DRR. So my presentation is basically emphasizing the leadership in some more aspect, but it is more than a statistical presentation. It's a discussion or the question raising presentation. So this is about women disaster leadership in disaster risk reduction. And I would like to cover the Honorable Prime Minister of India's 10-point agenda during my presentation. So before any slide you see on the screen, just read this word. That I was devastated by the fact that I could not provide first aid to my neighbors who suffered serious injuries and whose house was destroyed in the earthquake. So it is the statement by Milena Brovic. She is no big name, but a simple resident of Serbia, Kraljevo. It was an earthquake where she not know about how she provide the first aid or to the people who are suffering from the serious injuries. Imagine that you have a fire extinguisher, but you don't know how to use it. Imagine you have a boat, but you not know how to run it or how to sail it. So these are some questions that the women community basically face, and not only the women community, we can say in many documentation you will say the vulnerable community. So these are some questions that they deals with during the disaster situation. But this question that I internationally give the example of a resident from Serbia, it is also true in our country. You can see this slide where it is a time of the COVID-19 where a woman is trying to save the life of her husband by providing her breath to him. So it is a case from the Agra, a city in Uttar Pradesh, in the state of Uttar Pradesh from India, where a woman desperate attempt was recorded on the photographs. So while she was resuscitating dying COVID-19 positive husband by breathing into mouth. What do you think about the leadership? You put your life on a stake and providing the breath to a COVID-19 patient. So it is the best example of the courageous leadership by this lady. And this is the situation that these women community faced during the disaster. This is the example from the COVID-19, but we have many more that has been discussed by the previous speaker. So after this, some sensitization effort in my previous two slides, that how what kind of challenges that are not written in any notebook, any documentation in all around the world they face in their daily life during the disasters. So, but we have a systematic approach of to build a global disaster resilience framework to build the resilience of the nations and communities, because disaster management is not the domain of a single state, nation, or a community, but it is the goal of everyone. No one is safe until and unless everyone is not safe. So with this aim, in 2005 and 15, Hago Framework for Action was launched, and after the end of this 2015-30, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was launched. The aim was to build the resilience among the nations on various aspects. Not only this specialized disaster management frameworks of action, we have the Sustainable Development Goal, and you will be surprised to know that 10 out of, there are the 17 SDG goal. We know that 15 to 30, they are set to complete in the 2030, and out of the 17 SDG, 10 are focused on the disaster risk reduction. So let's see this aspect we are discussing today through this international webinar, that gender equality is an important aspect of this SDG and our disaster management domain as well. Now, if we see the women leadership in DRR, so we have the Prime Minister 10-point agenda in India. So this is a very important document, which is also got due weightage in the National Disaster Management Plan 2019 as well. If we see the NDMP 2019 Chapter 1 Preliminaries 1.6, we will see this 10-point. This is known as the Prime Minister 10-point agenda. It is a famous document in disaster management. Here you can see 10 aspects where all development sectors must imbibe the principle of disaster risk management. Second, work towards the risk coverage of all. Third is what we are discussing today, is encouraging greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk management. So we can say that this today's program is taking inspiration from the item 3rd of the Prime Minister 10-point agenda itself. So here we discuss about how we encourage the greater involvement and leadership of women, which is really lacking in our disaster management efforts, or popular disaster management cycle. So there are many more, but today, since this presentation is focusing on this and the time is short, so I'm going to emphasize this third, encouraging greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk management. And you will see a very inspiring picture of the women leadership in the in social cause, or we can say that how to what extent they have the leadership. This is the famous photograph from the Chipko Andolan, where women encircle the street to save this deforested in their area. So they have the sentiments associated with this aspect. They have sentiments associated with the nature. They have sentiments associated with their children, with their son, their daughter, their husband, and their parents. So this is a very important aspect that needs to be discussed in the public domain. So women and leadership, if we see that Disaster Management Act 2005 clearly says, it's chapter number 11, section 61 clearly indicates the prohibits all the forms of discrimination. But it's an irony that though in many developing countries, women's role in emergency planning, risk assessment, etc. is not much, or at times totally absent, still women display tremendous courage, resilience, and necessary skills during these crises. So here we can say, when we talk about the disaster management, we often talk about multi-stakeholder approach or engagement as well. And here, when we see that many international strategies and framework have identified women as one of the key stakeholder in any disaster management plan management effort, due to many reasons. Because women play a significant role in disaster response and recovery stages, specifically at household level. You can, if you go for managing any disaster from the national level, state level, or district level, whatever it is, but ultimately you have to manage the disaster at the household level, and in which the woman has a key stakeholder and key player. So that's why it is an important aspect in risk reduction area. So here, these are the 2 lines of this presentation title as well, women leadership and DRR. So leadership signifies how closely this is associated with the risk reduction framework at household level, even the basic brick of any society. So risk reduction means try to try to reduce the risk as much as possible. You can see this watch here, and we have referred in the risk reduction processes to keep it as low as possible. Possible if the possibility is 0, but you know that technically 0 is not possible. That's why we try to keep it low. And women leadership in doing all this in reducing this risk associated with disaster is a key aspect. So if we see the women's actual condition, as the previous speakers also emphasize upon, so they are the multiple barrier in this direction. I am not discussing any data, that's because I know they have been discussed in the previous one, how much how much women suffer from the Indonesia, like 75% population of the women community got affected from there. That is already discussed by respected speakers in their previous slide. So there are certain barriers because if we compare it with the men, then they have the good opportunity of learning various things, but they have household work and household responsibility as well, along with their cultural norms that limit the woman's role to the domestic responsibilities, difficulty in balancing work and life and family commitments, women feeling the lack of confidence to speak up in the male dominated environment. It is a reality, unfortunate, but it is a reality. So these are the compound by lack of the opportunity to practice and obtain leadership skills become a great challenge in almost all the countries. Specifically in the developing country, the situation is very challenging. But the situation is going to. But friends from all around the world, we know that we have seen some really thought-provoking reports in the recent past. So this is the human cost of disaster report, and as per this report, natural disasters is going to lodge a great pace in the coming era, and we can see without data, number of disasters has increased a lot. Like whether it is drought, earthquake, extreme temperature, flood, landslide, mass storm, volcanic activity, wildfire, whatever it is, you can see a considerable increase in this. So obviously, whatever we have discussed till date, it is certainly not adequate till date, but it is going to be more and more challenging in the future years. So women leadership has to be promoted and encouraged. It is the need of our now. It is not an option anymore. It is not any choice anymore. It is the need of the hour, because you can see a number of disasters and their frequency is increasing. So recently, in the same line, how IPCC sixth assessment report has been published, and this put forward a challenging picture before the society, before the globe. Needless to say that it is beyond the boundaries now. It is associated disasters see no boundaries, obviously. So there are the certain thought-provoking fact that in the what we are expecting in 2100, whatever the plan where we are setting for the for the 2100, now we have to implement it much before that, because in the next 20 years global warming will be breached the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It may have the possibility that the coastal regions, around the coastal country like India itself have the 7,516 kilometer around coastal line. So there are lots of migration going to be recorded in the coming days, and 1 degree rise in temperature, there will be 7% increase in the intensification of the extreme rain event. Again, a serious picture. Carbon dioxide concentration is highest in 2 million years. Sea level rise is the fastest, is going to be 3,000 a year. So as ma'am is representing the Sri Lanka, so all the country who are have the coastal touch. So this is going to be a great challenge before there. Or obviously, please mute your mic. Hello, kindly mute your mic. So this is some serious picture. So ocean warming will going to be continue, which has increased to 2.8 times from the 1970s time. So what we are discussing in 2030, you can see the scenes are presenting some different picture. Now, if I tell you, if show the Indian example, so Niti Aayog of India ring its alarming bell. India is going to suffer from a great water crisis in the coming time. So Indian water crisis, 600 million Indians face high to extreme stress over the water. At India, at least a considerable population people die everywhere due to the lack of access to safe water. And this India's water crisis is going to be worse in the future. So 70% of India's water is reported to be the contaminated, and so this is some database picture. And by 2030, where we are expecting that we are going to submit a report in the SDG, we are going to be accountable for the this Sendai Framework. So the situation is about 40% of the population has no access to the drinking water. Why I am telling about the water? Because you know that it's most of the impact is going to suffer on the backbone of the women. Here you can say, without safe drinking water and adequate sanitation and hygiene factors, it is harder for women and girls to lead safe, dignified, productive, and healthy lives. These inequalities based on the gender create vast divides between men and women in their ability to access, manage, and benefit from the water, sanitation, and hygiene, with devastating consequences of the enjoyment of other human rights and gender equality more generally. You know, many countries, there is a responsibility of the carrying water, making food. This is by default with their societal setup. It is come on the women's. So obviously this type of situation is going to be create a great challenge before them. Now, without taking much time, here I am going to discuss some facts that what we need to discuss, because there is a all the good type of books have been has been written, but only the implementation part is left. So all the good quotation has been said by the great people, but only the implementation is left. This is the problem that we need to basically focus with these programs. That one of the program we are today pursuing in. So encourage and enhance the proportion of the women in organization leadership and at the grassroots level. So organizational setup, the women place, the women's position and their role is very important at the grassroots level in various organizational setups. So women affected from the disaster have the right to participate in the decision that affect their lives. So if any woman who is sufferer of any disaster, so who is going to tell us much better than her, than what type of situation she faced? So so we should give the due importance to her experiences, and we should implement on the basis of that experiences. So honor driven reconstruction and honor driven ownership to the women is very important when we go for the reconstruction abilities, reconstruction efforts. So we so if we go for any, इसको बंद कर रहे हैं अभी आप? अच्छा ठीक है okay. So when we go for any after post disaster phase, so we can give the leadership or ownership to the woman in a official way, so that the people got the opportunity to play of leaders in the risk reduction efforts. So like in many society, this is the case study from the Bangladesh, where there was a tradition that when the food was distributed, so there was a tradition that women are going to get at last. So this type of situation must not be there, because the male dominated society, this is the common things that needs to be changed. And evidences of whether women leaders advance equality for other women is mixed. One thing we also have to show, when we talk about the women leadership, yes, they got leadership, but there are a late level of women who got the leadership position. So is leadership is transferred to the lower level of women community or not? For some highly leadership position, but people are going to hit. This is a uniformity leadership must be implemented, and at the grassroots level, women leaders for women, if they involve in the leadership role, they can better connect with the vulnerable groups. They can lead. And UNESCO 2015 A said the present opportunity for progress in gender roles. You know, if you talk about the leadership, it is not providing, and we are not providing the rights to them, so it is not going to work. So this stigma the only way if we create the jobs in disaster management for women, for making them independent. Once they got the jobs, they are managing their disaster on a regular basis. So obviously they got leadership position because of their experiences in them. So this may be also a effect here. So we often discuss some things. See these type of similar things because the time is very short. So I'm not going to stretch this presentation more. So we have a dedicated group, global community on the Telegram to discuss all these issues associated with various disaster management aspects. We have discussed the SDGs, Sendai Framework, Paris Agreement, Prime Minister 10-point agenda, National Action Plan on Climate Change, DRI, recently launched, and brainstorming and advice on disaster management issues is also issued by theirs. So here you can join here and we can discuss, we can continue this discussion 24/7 and all around the group. And in the light side, you can see the Mami Miju Tori ma'am, so special representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Reduction and head of DRR. She said leadership is not being able to look at what is happening around you and think, how can I make this better? So we all have to go for this betterment at individual level, so it can face like a viral message in the society. So with this word, I would like to thank you so much for the patiently listening.
Thank you, Mr. Avdesh. Due to shortage of time, I think you had a lot to say. Yeah, thank you, Avdeshji. I think you had a lot of other ideas and plans to talk about, but due to shortage of time, we will not be able to, entertain that. So I think one important aspect which you talked about, managing disaster at household level, and there if we are able to mainstream women at each household level, if they are equally partner to all the process of decision making, certainly we are going to enhance their capability in larger society also. Water crisis, as you mentioned, that certainly take a lot of time of women, and this is one important issue raised by Ms. Sandra also, that water related issues and disasters or waterborne diseases are increasing. So how to channelize those time of women in some fruitful aspect, that is also important. With this, I think now we have come to the end of today's workshop, and I cannot find much questions in our chat box because I feel that the program was so full of knowledge and data and information that there is no query. Some basic general queries which raised in chat box was already addressed by Mr. Panda. So I feel now we come to an end of this workshop, and I feel that equality in preparedness and capacity development is both for men and women, providing equal opportunity for proper growth and development, and special effort to mainstream activities for women equity, including allocation of budget, especially dedicated to women development and participation, is very important. As Mr. Panda also emphasized that budget should be gender sensitive. If above is not considered, there is a danger that women may become invisible in all our planning and implementation of program related to community development and disaster risk reduction. To address a women perspective require a change in mindset and attitude of policymaker and implementer, as it is emphasized by many of the presenter. Even Rekha ma'am emphasized this, that political will is lacking in all the process of planning and mainstreaming when we talk about women in DRR and in common to all other programs. So every citizen, everyone, each one of us present today here on this platform has a role to play in reducing disaster risk. And also the government has the best position to create an enabling new environment for women equality. Successful implementation of any development program require full and active and balanced participation of men and women. We cannot exclude 49 or 50% of our community and do development. That development will not be sustainable if we are ignoring 50% of women of our community. So with this word, I think now we come to an end of this workshop. And I will now hand over to Mr. Tarun, Director Zone for Solution, to give final vote of thanks to all our eminent panelists who enlightened us with so much of knowledge regarding how to do women mainstreaming in DRR, and all our patient listeners, like audience. I could see that since morning, same number of people are still there because the program was so much of full of knowledge. Knowledge was pouring in like anything. So I over to you, Mr. Tarun, to give final vote of thanks for today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanushree. You people organized very well program. First of all, I want to thanks all participants, including I am seeing RJ Ashish from FM24. He's by name of Anchor Ashish Jha. He did
Thank you so much, sir.
2-3 program on disaster management. I am seeing Venugopal ji. So I am seeing Abdullah Aden, Ajay Bhatt, Akash Kumar Tiwari. So lots of people are here. I can't name every audience, our listener. At a time, they were more than 300. So as of official decorum, I thanks all. I am thanking again Dr. Anita Bhatnagar Jain, Madam Rekha Yadav, JS Panchayati Raj, MS Sandra from Netherlands. She given a very good informative presentation. Ashish Panda Saab, he answered all the questions which were in the chat box. What a fantastic presentation. MS Surekha Pereira, she presented the, she raised the actually, you can say subdued voice of the fisherwoman, Sri Avdesh Kumar ji, and yourself also. I am also thankful to you, Tanushree Verma. You organize a very well program. Thank you, everybody. I invite you all to be in touch, and we are bound to work in disaster management. We need your support. Without your support, world can't be a safer place. We invite you all to support us, to help us in knowledge, in moral support, whatever support you can give us to make this world safer a place. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
So, shall we close this meeting?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Agreed.
On a positive note, please.
Thank you.
One quotation I
Thank
want
you,
to
Panda
mention here.
sir. Thank you. Thank you. Audience, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amrita
Nakul sir.
Pandey. Thank you.
Nakul sir.
Thank you, Malik ji.
Nakul sir.
नकुल सर, आशीष जी कुछ कहना चाह रहे हैं?
Please, please.
Sir, the program started with a wonderful quotation by ma'am, Tanushree ma'am, that if we teach a woman, probably we are teaching the entire family. And if we are teaching a young, girl child, probably we are teaching the entire future, our own future. So let us end this program with a wonderful quotation by one philosopher, William Golding. He says that it is his quote, but I fully agree with that. He says that I think that women are foolish to pretend that they are equal to men. In reality, they were always far superior, and it will always be like that. They are far superior than us. Only thing is that opportunity that should be given at their doorfront because of some of this.
So at this platform, from Zone 4 Solution, Panda ji, we will provide the platform
Opportunity.
for these women opportunity. Thank you everybody, and we will keep in touch. We will discussing this issue. We will take it ahead. Thank you everybody. Bye.
God bless. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.